Breaking Bad is hailed as one of the greatest TV shows of all time because its ratings increased with each season, and the plot became progressively more captivating. While many shows have fallen from grace due to disappointing finales, Breaking Bad maintained its momentum and concluded perfectly, earning near-perfect ratings and a spot in the Guinness World Records. Today, we will be discussing the highest-rated season of Breaking Bad, which is also its final season, Season 5. Following the events of the previous season, the most charismatic supporting character, Gus, successfully wiped out the Mexican cartel. In his quest for revenge, he also eliminated business obstacles. Just as Gus was about to enter the peak of his career, he was killed by Walter in an explosive moment of carelessness. This scene became one of the most iconic and shocking moments in the entire series. From this point on, Walter's face no longer showed the fear of death threats. He became increasingly arrogant and ruthless. Returning home, Walter meticulously cleaned up all the materials he used to make the bomb, including the lily of the valley plant by the pool. This act confirmed once again that it was Walter who poisoned Brock. After receiving a call from Walter, Skyler knew the crisis was over and returned home with her son from Hank's place. Walter Jr. was still engrossed in the news of Gus's death and excitedly shared it with Walter. However, Skyler went straight to her room without a word, leaving Walter feeling very displeased. He listened to his son praise Hank with a dismissive attitude. In the end, Walter couldn't help but come to his wife, Skyler, having deduced that Walter was behind Gus's death, reacted with the fear any ordinary person would have. This event caused a rift in their relationship. Skyler has her own thoughts and is more independent, so if Walter continues to darken, their values will diverge greatly. This set the stage for future developments. Lonely Walter had to raise a glass to himself in the mirror to celebrate. Just then he suddenly got up, as if he remembered something he had forgotten to deal with. The scene then shifted to Hank, who was on crutches, arriving at Gus's burnt-out lab. Hank's dedication was undeniable, as he meticulously searched for any clues. However, due to Walter's expert arson, there was almost nothing left for Hank to find. Just as Hank was about to curse in frustration, he spotted a burnt security camera on the wall. This was precisely what Walter had just remembered. Meanwhile, Mike, recovering in Mexico, also received news of Gus's death. Without hesitation, he drove off to confront Walter. He didn't slow down when he saw an oncoming car. It was Walter and Jesse in the approaching vehicle.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Hold up, hold up! Get out of my way, kid! Mike, wait a minute, all right? Let him talk!
Let him talk. I am done listening to this asshole talk.
Now get out of my way!
Yeah, he saved his own life.
One more word! Mike, if you kill him, you're gonna have to kill me. Come on.
If Jesse hadn't intervened, Walter might have followed Gus to his grave. Once Mike calmed down, Walter explained the reason for their visit. Because now only Mike knows where Gus's security footage is, and if they don't destroy it, all three of them are screwed. Of course Mike knew where the video was. He held out his right hand to Jesse through the pain.
Key, scumbag. It's the universal symbol for key.
They quickly drove to Gus's office, knowing the recordings were on his laptop, but they arrived too late. The police had already seized Gus's laptop as evidence. Thankfully, the laptop was password protected, preventing Hank from accessing it immediately. Mike received confirmation that the laptop was stored in the police evidence room. Realizing it was impossible to retrieve the laptop, Mike prepared to flee. Walter, unwilling to give up, asked Mike to describe the layout of the evidence room, but Mike thought Walter was being delusional. The security of the evidence room was comparable to a bank vault. With 24-hour surveillance, getting Gus's laptop was impossible. Walter insisted they didn't need to retrieve it, just destroy it. Mike assumed Walter planned to use a bomb again, but even a bomb couldn't breach the thick concrete walls. As their argument escalated, Jesse had a moment of brilliance.
Or what about a magnet?
What? Magnet? What about it?
Walter and Mike stared at Jesse in surprise. As soon as the scene changes, a few of the men find Old Joe at the junkyard and they tell him what they want. Old Joe assured them that as long as the money was right, he could build anything they needed. For now, money wasn't an issue. Soon, Old Joe assembled an electromagnetic device and warned them to remove all metal objects from their bodies. When Walter activated the power, the laptop began to lose signal.
Yeah, that did it!
To be extra cautious, Walter insisted on adding another power source to ensure the job was done. On a dark, windy night, Mike was the first to act. He used foam to block the security camera and skillfully opened the security door. Then, he signaled Walter and Jesse with a flashlight. Compared to their first season's heist of methylamine from the chemical plant, Walter and Jesse were much more composed and professional. To get as close as possible to the evidence room, Jesse drove the car onto the sidewalk. Walter then activated the power switch. First, the police computers were disrupted by the strong magnetic field. Then all the metal objects in the evidence room were pulled to the outer wall. Walter turned up the power to the maximum, causing the car to tilt against the wall. The police, realizing something was wrong, ran outside, but by then, Walter and Jesse had already fled.
What exactly are you celebrating?
You left the truck behind.
So what?
So what? So what if they find prints? And what if they trace it back to the wrecking yard?
They won't. There's no prints, I made sure of that. There's no paperwork on the truck, the magnet, or the batteries. Untraceable salvage, all of it. Made sure of that, too.
Well, you got all the answers. So you tell me, answer man, did all that even work just now?
Yes. It worked.
I was supposed to take that on faith. Yeah? Why? How do we know?
Because I say so.
Jesse and Mike both look at Walter in surprise when they hear what he has to say. Without Gus's influence, Walter had become extremely arrogant. The next day, the police began to inventory the damaged evidence. Although the laptop was successfully destroyed, a photo frame of Gus and Max was also broken, revealing a Swiss bank account number. This became an important lead. Meanwhile, Walter confronted Saul for transferring his money without permission. Following Skylar's request, Walter unleashed a torrent of abuse at Saul. Saul isn't happy about this either, and pulls out the ricin-laced cigarettes that Walter had him recover from Jesse. Saul reminded Walter of the risks he had taken for him. This confirmed Jesse's earlier suspicions were correct, but he hadn't guessed that Walter used the toxin from the Lily of the Valley plant. Ultimately deceived by Walter's superb acting, at Saul's office, as Walter showed no gratitude, Saul handed him the cigarette and told him to leave.
What are you? Come on. Hey. Hey.
When I say we're done.
But Saul failed to recognize that Walter was no longer the man he once knew. The poor Saul couldn't even look Walter in the eye. Back home, Walter chose to forgive Skylar for moving the money. He tried to embrace her, but Skylar's eyes were filled with fear of him. Although Gus was dead, his influence remained deeply rooted. During his lifetime, Gus frequently collaborated with a German company called Madrigal, from which he procured various equipment for his lab. After Gus's death, the police traced back and targeted the executives of Madrigal who had worked with him. The first to be targeted was Peter, the head of the fast food division. Peter, feeling hopeless, tasted various dipping sauces, knowing this was his last meal. Soon, his secretary informed him that 3 detectives were there to see him. He looked distantly towards his office. A photograph of him with Gus showed the depth of their collaboration. Knowing he couldn't escape death, Peter chose to take his own life to protect others. Meanwhile, Jesse was still distressed over the missing ricin cigarette. Worried a child might find it, he asked Walter to help him search for it. They tore the place apart but couldn't find it. As they were about to take a break, Walter noticed the vacuum cleaner. Maybe it was inside. Jesse checked and found the cigarette with the ricin inside. Walter quickly took it and disposed of it. Jesse was very touched, not knowing it was all an act by Walter. Before coming to Jesse's place, Walter had put table salt in a similar container, carefully comparing the two. Satisfied, Walter planned to dispose of the real ricin, but hesitated at the last moment, thinking he might need it someday. So, Walter hid the real ricin cigarette in the socket of his bedside table. In this season, Walter truly reached new depths of darkness. This plot twist made the audience feel that Walter had gone too far. Unaware of the truth, Jesse wept, feeling deeply guilty for having mistrusted Walter and nearly killing him. Walter did this to ensure Jesse would always feel indebted to him, making it easier to control him. Walter then pretended to comfort Jesse.
I wouldn't change a thing. You and I working together, having each other's back, it's what saved our lives. I want you to think about that as we go forward.
Go forward where?
The scene shifted to Mike's house. Walter's plan was to recruit Mike to help take over Gus's market. He and Jesse would handle production, while Mike would manage distribution and logistics. But Mike flatly refused.
Thanks, but no thanks.
We've had our issues, you and I. But I would suggest that you leave emotion out of this decision.
I am. You are trouble. I'm sorry the kid here doesn't see it, but I sure as hell do. You are a time bomb.
Walter asked Mike to reconsider and shook hands before leaving. Meanwhile, the DEA office was packed. On the left sat the German Madrigal representatives, and on the right, the DEA team handling the Gus case. Following Peter's suicide, Madrigal's top executives decided to cooperate with the police. Shocked by the turn of events, as the police investigation deepened, it revealed that many Madrigal employees had financial ties to Gus. During the conversation, a female executive named Lydia displayed a meaningful expression. The Gus case implicated many people. A trafficker of prohibited substances operated right under the DEA's nose, leading to Hank's boss George being removed from his position. He regretted not heeding Hank's advice. Before he left, George was still haunted by the death of Gus, who had come to his house for a barbecue before he died, and had a hard time accepting that Gus was a two-faced man. The question of who gave Tio the bomb is the biggest mystery of all, but with the deaths of several people, there is no way to find out the evidence. Fortunately, they obtained Gus's banking information, hoping to find some leads there. In a cafe, Madrigal executive Lydia furtively met with Mike. To avoid drawing attention, she spoke to Mike with her back turned. Like in a movie, this absurd behavior left Mike feeling at a loss for words. Mike, without a word, sat down opposite Lydia. When the waitress brought tea, Lydia pretended to run into an old friend. Lydia is not a woman to be trifled with. She took out a list of 11 people. The 11 people on the list are all involved in the sales chain, and if the police find them, they're likely to confess. Lydia, fearing for her safety, suggested Mike eliminate these people to prevent any loose ends. Mike looks at Lydia with surprise, because these are his men. Gus had treated them well and had already arranged an exit strategy for them. Even after Gus's death, they would receive a substantial hush money payout. Mike warned Lydia never to bring up such foolish ideas again, then turned and left. However, he underestimated Lydia's resolve. Soon after, Mike was summoned to the DEA for questioning. As he arrived, he saw Chow, Gus's former warehouse manager, who had just been interrogated. Chow's uneasy demeanor showed he was clearly shaken. Mike entered the interrogation room, unperturbed. He didn't even bring a lawyer. Facing Hank's questions, he didn't reveal any cracks. Hank also found out that Mike had been a cop before, and that it would be a bit of a stretch for him to work as a security guard for Gus with his qualifications. The implication was that Gus's commercial empire was surely connected to Mike. Mike claimed ignorance, noting the police had no evidence to arrest him. With that, he stood up to leave. Seeing Mike's unyielding stance, Hank played his trump card. How about we talk about the $2 million in your granddaughter's name? They had traced the bank numbers from the back of Gus's photo, uncovering 12 offshore accounts. These accounts included the 11 people on Lydia's list, and one belonged to Mike's beloved granddaughter, Kaylee. Hank expressed his shock that a 10-year-old girl had $2 million in her account. Hank told Mike that fortunately, he hadn't touched that money, so the police had no grounds to arrest him yet. But the other 11 were not so lucky. Their accounts were frozen, and 9 of them had accessed the money. They were now in custody. Those 9 might betray Mike by tomorrow, and Kaylee's $2 million could be confiscated. Hank suggested that if Mike cooperated, he might at least leave some money for his granddaughter. The sudden news caught Mike off guard, but he could only grit his teeth and insist he knew nothing. Back at home, as Mike was playing with Kaylee, he received a call from Chow. Chow wanted to meet with Mike. Chow's bank accounts had been frozen, and he wanted to discuss the hush money with Mike. Mike's sharp instincts sensed something was wrong. Arriving at Chow's address, the battle-hardened Mike knew it was a trap. Inside, a hitman was waiting, aiming his gun at the peephole, ready to shoot as soon as Mike knocked. But Mike wasn't that easy to fool. Using his granddaughter's doll to block the peephole, he then subdued the hitman from behind. Mike recognized the hitman. He had worked for Gus and was one of the 11 people on Lydia's list. Lydia had sent him to eliminate the other 10 people on the list. With his money frozen, Chris took the job for $10,000 per person and $30,000 for Mike. Since the other 9 were in prison, Chris started with Chow. He hoped Mike would spare his life. given their past loyalty. Mike was filled with mixed emotions. He realized his once loyal subordinate had betrayed him for Lydia, but he was even less inclined to let the mastermind, Lydia, off the hook. That night, Mike stealthily entered Lydia's home and held her at gunpoint. Lydia pleaded for her life, saying she had a young daughter to care for. Mike thinks for a moment and then doesn't kill Lydia and asks Lydia if she can get the methylamine. A positive answer spared Lydia's life. Back in his car, Mike called Walter.
Yes.
You still plan to move forward?
Yes, we do.
I've reconsidered. I'm in.
Good.
Finally, Mike decided to partner with Walter. With Gus's accounts frozen, Mike needed to pay the hush money for the 9 in prison and save some for his beloved granddaughter. Thus, the Walter, Jesse, and Mike trio was officially formed, ushering in the post-Gus era. An elated Walter told his wife that things were becoming easier and that everything had a good reason, as if having a good reason justified doing bad things. What seemed to become simpler actually grew more complicated, and what appeared to be order marked the beginning of destructive madness. This show was indeed full of irony at every turn. This is a severely underrated TV show that has been overlooked since its debut. Only 2 million people watched the entire first season during its premiere. In a time when many acclaimed shows are experiencing steep declines, Breaking Bad producer Vince Gilligan sees this as an opportunity to meticulously refine the plot. Finally, hard work pays off, and this show enters the Guinness World Records as the highest-rated TV series. In the last episode, Mike agreed to join Walter's team because he needed to pay the hush money Gus had promised to 9 inmates and wanted to leave a fortune for his granddaughter. It seems everyone has found a fitting reason to be part of this operation. Saul is still haunted by Mike's previous threat to break his legs. It was only after intense persuasion from Walter and Jesse that Saul reluctantly agreed to Mike's inclusion.
All right, let him in, Yul.
Saul tries to shake hands, but Mike doesn't give a damn. Then Mike set 3 ground rules for Walter. Walter would be responsible for production, and Mike would handle sales. With neither interfering in the other's work, Mike's tone suggested he considered himself the boss. But Walter, at this point, was completely dismissive. Outwardly, he agreed to Mike's terms, but he was secretly controlling the entire situation.
Hey, you're okay with that?
Yes. He handles the business, and I handle him.
Next, they went to inspect potential bases of operation. First, Saul introduced a cardboard box factory, but it was quickly vetoed by Walter because the steam and salt produced during the process of manufacturing prohibited substances would compromise the purity of the product. Then, Saul found a food processing plant, but Walter rejected it too due to the likelihood of government inspections. Finally, they arrived at a warehouse. While everyone thought it was unsuitable, Walter agreed to it.
It's perfect. What?
How are we gonna fit a lab in here?
Who said here?
Walter was inspired by the stacks of canvas there. In the U.S., when houses are infested with pests, homeowners hire professional exterminators for a few days, during which the owners are not at home. This is the perfect cover. The most dangerous place is indeed the safest. The once timid Walter would never have conceived such a bold idea. Saul explained that he had worked with this extermination team for 5 years. On the surface, they were pest control professionals, but in reality, they were a gang of thieves. They were smart, never committing theft during the extermination, but instead copying keys and waiting a long time before robbing the clients. Saul knew them well and said they could be easily bought.
So, we take a vote? Why?
For ease of equipment transfer, Jesse had Badger and Skinny customize large instrument cases. Badger and Skinny wanted to join the operation, but clearly, there were no positions for them at the moment. After Mike briefed the extermination team on specific precautions, Walter and Jesse began installing the equipment in the boxes. While discussing the installation, Andrea returned with her child. Although Walter and Andrea had met once before when Walter sought Jesse's help, Jesse still respectfully introduced Walter to Andrea. Seeing the child he had poisoned before, Walter showed no sign of guilt. Comparing this Walter to the kind-hearted man from the first season, his transformation into a ruthless character is truly astonishing. Just as Walter was about to make an excuse to leave, Andrea enthusiastically invited him to stay for dinner, and Walter gladly accepted. This gave him time alone with Brock. As Walter looked at Brock, can you guess what he was thinking? The next day, the extermination team took on a job. As soon as the homeowners left, Walter and Jesse arrived. Since they had already moved the equipment in, they could get straight to work. At that moment, a young man reminded Walter that there was a camera in the house, which he had turned off. Walter sees that the young man is pretty smart, so he asks him his name.
Todd, sir.
Todd is an important character in the 5th season, and this was just an early introduction. Then Walter and Jesse started their first job since Gus's death. Walter enjoyed the process immensely because it made him feel like he was utilizing his strengths. During a break, Walter and Jesse relaxed on the homeowner's couch, drinking beer and watching TV. Walter brought up Jesse's relationship with Andrea. Jesse said he was serious about her. Walter asked if Jesse had told Andrea about his work. Jesse clearly hadn't considered these questions. The cunning Walter continued to manipulate Jesse, saying that if Andrea truly loved him, she would understand everything he did. He insisted that since they had decided to be together, they should be honest with each other. Secrets only create distance. Walter said that if Andrea truly loved him, she would understand everything. Walter was indeed very manipulative. He knew Andrea wouldn't understand Jesse, just as Skylar never understood him. After hearing Walter's advice, Jesse fell into deep thought. Meanwhile, Marie visited her sister's car wash, and the sisters chatted. Marie mentioned that Hank had returned to work at the DEA. His colleagues who doubted his judgment about Saul were proven wrong. Marie also mentioned Walter, saying his 51st birthday was coming up soon. Skylar, who had been on edge lately, said she hadn't decided how to celebrate. Marie told Skylar that Walter was diagnosed with cancer around this time last year, and that it was the 1-year anniversary of his cancer battle, so he had to celebrate. Skylar's reaction surprised Marie. She lit a cigarette, despite having quit for years, and then she broke down.
Shut up!
What? I'm sorry. Please don't speak to me like that. I am simply saying that you
Will you
can't
shut up?
Hey.
Shut the hell up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Marie, thinking her sister was being mistreated, angrily went to confront Walter. Upon learning Marie's reason for visiting, Walter immediately put on an act, explaining that Skylar's recent emotional turmoil was due to Ted's accident that left him paralyzed. Walter claimed Skylar was under pressure because of this. Marie was completely confused. What did Ted's paralysis have to do with her sister? So, Walter casually mentioned Skylar's affair with Ted. He asked Marie to keep it a secret, saying he didn't want Hank to look down on him. Hearing this, Marie instantly felt sympathy for Walter. The conversation ended quickly, and as she left, Marie couldn't help but give Walter a comforting hug. Jesse was also in a bad mood, torn about whether to tell his girlfriend about his work after Walter's talk. Soon, the big day for splitting the money arrived. The 3 large piles of cash on the table looked substantial, but Walter quickly noticed 20% was missing. Mike explained that the 20% was for the driver. Walter was immediately unhappy, questioning why a driver would get so much, but Mike justified it by saying the driver took on significant risk and deserved the pay. Mike continued to distribute the money, and soon it was half as much again. He also had to set aside hush money for the 9 inmates, which was no small amount. To make matters worse, this payment needed to be made every month. Walter, unable to bear it any longer, insisted that Mike should cover the cost himself. As the two were about to come to blows, Jesse generously offered his share. Seeing this, Walter didn't want Jesse to suffer, so he temporarily conceded to Mike. But this didn't mean Walter would keep compromising. Walter was very dissatisfied with the small amount of cash left, thinking it was even less than what he earned working for Gus. Walter lacked Gus's caution and scope, and he also didn't have Gus's various channels. After Mike left, Jesse told Walter he planned to break up with his girlfriend because he didn't want to drag her down, but Walter wasn't paying attention. He was fixated on the division of the money. Jesse tried to persuade Walter, "When we made products for Gus, we produced 200 pounds a week. Now we can't even hit 50 pounds a week. With production so low, we're actually making a lot of money." But Walter's ambition was far from satisfied. So what do you think Walter will do next? Things you may never know about Breaking Bad. Walter's car was once rated one of the top 10 ugliest cars in Europe and America, and it was personally chosen by the director for Walter. The ugly exterior, the feces green color, and the perpetually unchanged spare tire, all these details highlight Walter's humble status. But ever since Walter successfully killed Gus, his ego has skyrocketed, and now he is extremely arrogant. Previously, to prevent Hank from investigating Gus's laundromat, Walter deliberately caused a car accident. Now, the car is fixed, and the repair shop owner has notified him to pick it up. After some thorough repair and maintenance, this car could run for hundreds of thousands of miles without any problems. In other words, Walter didn't need to replace the car just yet. But when he saw the hat, a symbol of Heisenberg, inside the car, Walter's pride swelled again. He felt this car no longer matched his current status.
You give me $50, and she's all yours.
You sure about this?
Sure as shoot.
Check the register.
Are you crazy?
Seeing his powerful reflection in the mirror, Walter immediately picked up a brand new Chrysler 300, a high-performance version. The car boasts a 6.4-liter V8 engine that can accelerate from 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, making it extremely aggressive. This also hints at Walter's uncontrollable, swelling ambition. Seeing the envy in his son's eyes, Walter decided to fulfill his son's wish.
Bonfire!
Walter has now lost himself in his arrogance. When Skylar returned, she found there wasn't even a parking space left. At the dinner table, father and son boasted about their beloved cars, while Skylar worried silently. At this point, she was too afraid to voice her anger at Walter's behavior. Walter then explained to Skylar that the cars were leased, so no one would suspect anything. Even if they were purchased, they wouldn't lack the money. As he spoke, Walter placed a wad of cash on the table. Seeing the cash, Skylar knew Walter was back to his old business. Facing Skylar's questioning, Walter said he needed to make back the $600,000 given to Ted. Skylar, not wanting her son to grow up in such an environment, suggested sending Walter Jr. to a boarding school, but Walter refused. Walter reassured Skylar that despite recent events, everything was now under control and he had everything handled. The next day was Walter's 51st birthday. As usual, Skylar would prepare a delicate bacon breakfast in the shape of his age. But this time, Skylar had no enthusiasm. It was only after Walter Jr.'s repeated requests that Skylar reluctantly put it together. It was so perfunctory. Meanwhile, Lydia, under immense pressure from all sides, was recently unable to eat or sleep well. She, usually attentive to details, even wore the wrong shoes. Just as she was feeling frustrated, Mike called to warn her that the DEA would arrive in 30 seconds. Sure enough, as soon as the call ended, Hank arrived with a team. They were there to find someone named Ron. Lydia led Hank and his team to the warehouse, and another executive from Madrigal Corporation was arrested. Ron was the person Mike had planted to steal methylamine from the warehouse. This terrified Lydia. Back at her office, still shaken, Lydia told Mike about the incident. Fearing that Ron might betray her, Mike reassured her that no one would betray them and said he would arrange for someone else to transport the methylamine. Back at the DEA, Hank was focused on Gus's case. He kept complaining about how Gus, with half his face blown off and buried underground, still managed to outsmart everyone. Hank's even suspicious of Lydia now. Although Lydia seemed normal, Hank noticed her mismatched shoes. How normal could she be? As Hank was stressing over the case, his boss brought good news. Due to Gus's close ties with the DEA, George was fired, and the higher-ups decided to promote Hank. Though a promotion and raise were good news, Hank wasn't particularly excited. Thus, Hank became the head of the DEA. After finishing his workday, Walter left Jesse to clean up because he needed to go home for his 51st birthday party. Before entering, Walter checked his appearance, but when he stepped inside, the scene was far from the lively party he had imagined. The house was cold and quiet. Nothing like last year's birthday party. In just 1 year, everything seemed to have changed. Walter asked about the evening's plans, and Skylar said only Hank and Marie would be coming. What was supposed to be a grand birthday party had turned into a simple family gathering. Meanwhile, on the way over, Hank asked Marie why she seemed unhappy lately. Marie said she had promised Walter not to tell anyone about Skylar's affair with Ted. Hearing this, Hank was stunned. Dinner wasn't even finished when Walter Jr. rushed out to drive around, leaving the remaining family members each lost in their own thoughts. Making for an awkward atmosphere, Hank tried to find topics to talk about. Skylar, acting out of character, slowly walked into the pool, causing panic among the others. Fortunately, Walter pulled her out in time. Marie went to the bedroom to comfort Skylar. Outside, Hank tried to console Walter, saying that as long as they could get by, even with a little infidelity, it would be okay. He revealed that Marie had also had an affair with a psychologist named David. They really are sisters. Before they could finish their conversation, Marie emerged from the bedroom, thinking her sister was suicidal, but Hank didn't agree. He thought Skylar just needed to talk to a psychologist. Marie offered to leave David's contact information. Marie also advised Walter that it was normal for couples to have ups and downs. Marie suggested taking Walter Jr. and her daughter to stay at her place for a while so that Walter and Skylar could repair their relationship. Walter then understood his wife's intentions. After Hank and Marie left with the kids, Walter went to the bedroom, and they had a huge argument over the situation. What should have been a happy birthday turned into a disaster. With no options left, Skylar finally said something that broke Walter's heart.
This is the best I could come up with, okay? I will count every minute that the kids are away from here, away from you, as a victory. I can't go to the police. I can't stop laundering your money. I can't keep you out of this house. I can't even keep you out of my bed. All I can do is wait.
Wait for what? What are you waiting for?
For the cancer to come back.
This was the price Walter paid for his actions. Meanwhile, Lydia turned off the warehouse camera and opened the door. Jesse had been waiting for some time. They entered the warehouse, and Lydia pointed to a barrel of methylamine, telling Jesse to take it. She had already removed it from the inventory. As Jesse used the forklift to lift the barrel, Lydia noticed something underneath it.
Wait, stop!
Tell me that's not what I think it is.
The next day, Jesse told Mike about the incident. Mike immediately recognized it as a tracker. The police wouldn't be this unprofessional. If it were the police, they'd place the tracker inside the barrel, not underneath it. Mike concluded that Lydia had staged the whole thing to sever ties with them. Furious, Mike decided to eliminate Lydia to prevent future problems, but women and children were Jesse's soft spot, and he began to dissuade Mike. What if Lydia wasn't behind it? They'd be burning a bridge. Jesse insisted on a vote.
The methylamine keeps flowing no matter what. We are not ramping down. We're just getting started. Nothing stops this train. Nothing.
It turned out to be obvious that Walter had the solution. As Walter was about to leave, Jesse called out to him.
You said it was your birthday, so I left the receipt in the box in case you want to exchange it. Anyway, hey, happy birthday.
This is the craziest episode of Breaking Bad. Walter, Jesse, and Mike attempt to steal materials for their contraband by robbing a moving train. To others, this would seem like an impossible task, but for the highly intelligent Walter, this silent theft is as simple as reaching into a bag. They prepare for the heist the day before. After careful measurement, they find the perfect location for their operation. Mike is responsible for observing the surroundings, while Walter, as the commander-in-chief, oversees the entire operation. First, they bury 2 large empty barrels in a dugout pit and fill one of them with water. Due to a lack of manpower, they enlist the help of Todd from the pest control company. Todd is curious and asks Walter why he'd fill a bucket with water if he's stealing methylamine. Walter says it's Jesse's idea and asks Jesse to explain. Jesse explains that the train is weighed before unloading, and if the weight is different, they will know the methylamine was stolen. Leading to an investigation, Jesse emphasizes that stealing methylamine from a train is a serious crime. He repeatedly stresses that no one else can know about this. Todd nods, unbeknownst to him. This sets up a huge plot twist later. Walter, a Nobel Prize-winning chemist, can't resist educating Todd. He explains that methylamine is a liquid that can dissolve in water and is slightly less dense than water. If they want to steal 1,000 gallons of methylamine, they need to replace it with about 900 gallons of water. Precisely 924 gallons, considering spillage and residue in the pipes. Walter insists on pumping in 920 gallons of water.
Yeah, but won't they figure out they got robbed anyway on account of getting watered down meth?
Well, out of 24,000 gallons, it'll only amount to about 4% dilution, so. But yes, you're right. They will notice. At which point, they will blame China for sending a marginally weaker batch.
Damn, you guys thought of everything.
Todd begins to argue with Walter. This turns Todd into a loyal fan of Walter. The question is, how did they get this information? It all started a day earlier, when Jesse met Lydia to exchange the methylamine. Lydia found that the DEA had placed trackers on the barrels, so Walter and his team temporarily had no methylamine. Mike, knowing Lydia, suspected it was a trick orchestrated by her. This evil woman had already killed 2 of his men, so Mike threatened to kill Lydia immediately, but Walter and Jesse persuaded him otherwise. They decided to test Lydia. This picks up the cliffhanger from the last episode left by Jesse.
Say, I like your idea. It's pretty, I think it's the way to go.
The plan begins. Walter goes to Hank's office, pretending to complain. Hank knows Walter has been having issues with Skylar, so Walter's visit seems natural. Walter's acting skills kick in.
Skylar doesn't love me anymore. And I don't know what to do, Hank. I don't. She says that I'm a bad influence on the kids. Yeah, not good for them. Oh, Jesus, Walt.
Seeing Walter cry, Hank kindly closes all the blinds to prevent his colleagues from seeing. To comfort Walter, Hank goes to make coffee, giving Walter some alone time. Walter immediately tampers with Hank's computer and pulls out a prepared bugging device. This was Walter's real purpose for visiting Hank. As Walter installs the bug in a picture frame, Hank suddenly returns with the coffee. Walter, quick on his feet, starts admiring a photo of Hank and Marie.
You two are really great together.
The scene shifts to Lydia being brought into a small dark room.
I can't be here. My daughter, my little girl. What are you doing? Mike, my daughter.
Shut up.
Mike hands Lydia a script, instructing her to call Hank and read it verbatim, threatening her with death if she tries any tricks. Lydia must not show any signs of fear. Through their conversation, Hank reveals he doesn't know about the trackers on the methylamine barrels and tells Lydia to set the barrels aside until he can investigate. Hank then hangs up.
Hey, Gomi, come here, would you?
Yeah.
Hey, man.
You don't know anything about GPS trackers on a barrel, do you? Matter with Houston I'm talking about.
No, over here from my team planning anything, why?
Oh, I don't know. Figured as much. Alright, thanks.
When they hear Hank and Steven's conversation through the bug, Lydia keeps begging Mike and the others to spare her, insisting that she didn't do it. Mike's suspicion is confirmed. Walter offers Lydia a chance to live, but she fails to seize it, not even if Jesse was against it, because the vote is now 2-1, just as Lydia makes her final struggle before death. The bug in Hank's office suddenly picks up sound again.
Hey, Errol. Please tell me you his lame brain has put a GPS tracker on the outside of a barrel of one earmarked for the medical warehouse in Houston.
Who's asking? Did someone find him?
Jesus, are you shitting me? Since when you put a GPS tracker on the outside of a barrel?
We didn't have time to go in there with hazard suits, Hank. They were about to ship. We epoxied them to the bottom. They were well hidden. I just...
Oh, really? Well, not well hidden enough. How many barrels you tagged?
All of them. All the ones headed to that warehouse, anyway.
Christ. Alright, well, sit tight and let me figure out the plan.
When they heard this dialogue, all their previous plans were overturned. It seems they almost killed their benefactor. If Lydia hadn't found the tracker, the DEA might have busted their hideout by now. Even though Lydia didn't lie this time, Mike still insists on killing her. He reveals that Lydia hired someone to kill him, stating that if they let her live, she will betray them at the first opportunity. Hearing this, Jesse's impression of Lydia worsens significantly. Seeing that the two are about to be convinced by Mike, Lydia, driven by a strong survival instinct, manages to save her life again.
You still need me, don't you, right?
You can't even get us a single barrel.
Who said anything about barrels? I'm talking about an ocean of this stuff.
Hearing this huge temptation, they begin a new round of negotiations. Lydia reveals that every Wednesday, a train full of oil pipes departs from Guangzhou, China. Using her position, she provides specific details about the train. Furthermore, the train passes through an area with no signal coverage, allowing you to stop the train and seize the methylamine. However, they are deeply conflicted about whether to kill the train engineer. To their surprise, the vicious Lydia looks down on them for this.
Give me a break. You guys were gonna murder me. I thought you were professionals.
Although Lydia provides crucial information, Walter and Mike have a disagreement again. Mike doesn't want to kill innocent people during the heist, but nothing can stop Walter now. While the two are arguing, Jesse, who is on the sidelines, has his wits about him.
We can rip off that train, and no one ever knows it got robbed.
It is Jesse's insight that leads to the meticulous plan at the beginning. The next day, they wait by the tracks early in the morning for the train to arrive. To force the train to stop, they enlist Saul's sidekick QB to stage a truck breakdown. Mike watches through binoculars. Everything is ready, and the train arrives on schedule. Walter and the others hide under the bridge to avoid being seen by the conductor. Soon, the conductor spots the broken-down truck ahead and hastily applies the emergency brakes. The train successfully stops in front of the truck. Seeing the train has stopped, Walter and his team quickly spring into action. They move like well-trained firefighters racing against the clock. Following Mike's signal, Jesse and Todd rush towards the train with hoses. Meanwhile, QB continues to stall the train engineer, asking for help with the truck's engine. Quickly, Jesse connects the hose from underneath, and Todd inserts the other end into the tank. Everything proceeds smoothly. Walter starts the gas engine to pump water in. As expected, something unexpected is about to happen. While the train driver was worried, a giant pickup truck came into the distance. QB hurriedly pretends to ask for help, asking if the driver knows anything about truck engines. Kind pickup driver says, "I don't know anything about engines, but I can push your car off the tracks first." QB pretends to protest, saying he doesn't want the driver to damage his truck, but he can't resist the urging of the two train engineers. Eventually, QB reluctantly accepts the help. Mike, watching from a distance, sees the unexpected situation and quickly alerts Walter to evacuate the train immediately. But the methylamine has not yet reached the amount they want, and the greedy Walter still won't stop. The train engineer is ready to start the train. Jesse, under the train, is extremely anxious as they are still short of the target amount. Jesse quickly fixes the hose connection, and Todd swiftly closes the lid on top. Jesse has no time to escape and lies flat, while Todd jumps off just as the train starts moving. Thus, an eventful yet successful heist is completed. As they celebrate this victory, they suddenly notice a young boy in the distance staring at them. He awkwardly waves at them, and they awkwardly look back at him. Before the operation, Jesse repeatedly emphasized to Todd that no one should know about this. Todd, remembering Jesse's instructions, immediately pulls out a gun and kills the boy. No! No! We all know that children are Jesse's Achilles heel because a child disrupted his punishment of the Spudge couple. Because of a child, he dared to argue under Gus's intense pressure. Because of a child, he risked his life to kill Gus's henchman. Because of a child, Jesse changed his mind and helped Walter get rid of Gus. Now, another innocent child has died in front of Jesse. What will he do this time? Never let your child wander alone, or they might end up in a dangerous situation. Just a moment ago, the little boy had wandered off to the countryside to play and found a tarantula. Delighted, he put the tarantula in a jar, but what the boy didn't realize was that he had seen something he shouldn't have, and he paid for it with his life. Although this incident deeply affected Jesse, the reality couldn't be changed. To avoid being discovered, they had to destroy the boy's body. Afterward, Todd desperately tried to justify his actions, claiming he did it for everyone's sake. Walter told Todd to step aside for a moment. They discussed how to deal with Todd. Walter proposed 3 options. The first was to fire Todd, but since he knew too many secrets, they would have to pay him a significant hush money. The second option was to kill Todd, but none of them wanted to see another death. The third option was to keep Todd around as a gopher, which would make it easier to control him. Walter and Mike both chose the third option, and Jesse had no strength to argue. Mike came out and warned Todd, "If you ever bring a gun to an operation again without permission, you'll find out what real trouble is." Everyone feels bad about killing an innocent kid. However, Todd showed no remorse and even kept the boy's tarantula. He was truly a monster in human skin. The next day, while Mike was at the park with his granddaughter Kaylee, DEA agents were watching him from a distance. Mike wrote a note and placed it under a trash can, then left with Kaylee. Steven, suspecting that Mike was exchanging information, had a colleague film the scene while he went to retrieve the note. But when he got it, he found it contained nothing but insults. Mike had already noticed the DEA watching him. At home, Mike used his laptop to listen to recordings from Hank's office, confirming Steven's report to Hank about him. As the saying goes, know thy enemy and win 100 battles. Meanwhile, with the methylamine in hand, Walter and Jesse continued producing their contraband as usual. Just as Jesse was about to turn off the TV and start working, the screen switched to news about the missing boy they had killed. Seeing this, Jesse sank into deep guilt again. Walter, understanding Jesse's mindset, quickly turned off the TV and urged him to forget the past and look to the future. He promised Jesse that nothing like this would ever happen again. Seeing that Jesse was too distraught to work, Walter kindly let him leave early. As Jesse changed his clothes to go home, he suddenly heard Walter whistling casually. Showing no guilt over the boy's death, Jesse realized that Walter had changed. He was no longer the kind and gentle man he once was. Later that evening, when Walter went to the warehouse to drop off supplies, he ran into Mike and Jesse there. Walter thought they were there to work overtime, but it turned out Mike was there to discuss ending their partnership. Mike had realized that the DEA was closing in on him, and it was only a matter of time before he got caught. He was planning to flee. Walter didn't try to stop Mike, as they often had disagreements. Just as Walter was about to assign Jesse to take over Mike's responsibilities, Jesse unexpectedly announced his resignation as well. Hearing this, Walter immediately flew into a rage. He pointed his finger at Jesse and yelled, "We just risked everything to get 1,000 gallons of methylamine, which can be converted into $300 million, and now you're quitting? Have you lost your mind?" Despite Walter's attempts to persuade him, Jesse remained unmoved. It turned out that he and Mike had already planned to sell their share of the methylamine. Mike had already found a buyer, and both he and Jesse could each walk away with $5 million. Jesse suggested to Walter that he could sell his share of the methylamine and live a peaceful life, but Walter refused to give up the opportunity to get rich for such a small profit. Jesse questioned Walter,
"Are we in the or the money business?"
Walter had long forgotten his original goal of earning $737,000. When the scene changes, Mike takes Jesse to the countryside to talk business. Declan, based on the amount of methylamine Mike and Jesse were selling, figured out they were only selling 2/3 of it. To monopolize the market, Declan demanded they sell all of the methylamine to him, although Mike was in a difficult situation. But after all, the money is in other people's hands, and he initiated the transaction with Declan. Mike had no choice but to compromise. Then Jesse contacted Walter, trying to persuade him to join them in selling the methylamine. Since no one was home, Walter invited Jesse to his house. Jesse stated his purpose for coming, but it was clear Walter had no intention of selling his share of the methylamine. No matter how much Jesse tried to persuade him, Walter stubbornly refused. Their values had clearly diverged significantly by this point. Walter brought up the example of when he sold his shares in Gray Matter Technologies. He was one of the company's founders, and even the name contained part of his own name, but for various reasons, he chose to leave. Later, Gray Matter went public and was now worth billions, something he regretted deeply for the rest of his life. He couldn't let a similar situation happen again and declared that he would use the methylamine to build his own empire.
Jesse, you asked me if I was in the money business. Neither. I'm in the empire business.
Apparently Jesse's not that ambitious. At that moment, Skylar suddenly came home, making Jesse extremely awkward. He hurriedly stood up to leave. Their last meeting had been in season 1 when Skylar, pregnant and assuming Walter was buying contraband from Jesse, confronted him and forbade him from selling to Walter. At that time, Jesse was also dealing with Emilio's body. Knowing how Skylar viewed him, Jesse quickly found an excuse to leave, but Walter forced him to stay for dinner. Walter acted like a tyrant whose words could not be contradicted. Skylar, however, was not one to be trifled with, and she gave Walter no face during dinner. Embarrassed, Jesse struggled to find a topic of conversation.
"So hey, how's business? The car wash. Mr. White said it's going really well. It's like you're a great manager."
He did, huh?
Yeah, he says you got it running like a machine, like well oiled. Yeah.
Did you also tell him about my affair?
At this point, Jesse no longer dared to speak, but only embarrassed to keep drinking water.
Be excused.
Walter informed Jesse that Skylar had sent the kids to Marie's house and that their marriage was on the rocks. Skylar was just waiting for his cancer to return and for him to die.
This business is all I have left now, and you want to take it away from me.
Clearly, Jesse couldn't convince Walter. After Jesse left, Walter hurried to the warehouse to deal with the methylamine early. However, the experienced Mike was already waiting for him, having predicted Walter's move. To ensure the safety of all the methylamine, Mike decided to restrain Walter and forcibly sell his share. The two spent the night in the warehouse. At dawn, Mike had to handle another issue before the deal, so he tied Walter to a radiator with zip ties. After Mike left, Walter saw a kettle nearby. He planned to use the kettle's glass shards to cut the zip ties. After struggling to reach the kettle's cord, he accidentally knocked the kettle farther away. Just as Walter was about to despair, he noticed the cord in his hand. An audacious idea flashed in his mind. He first turned off the power switch, then used his sharp teeth to strip the cord. Pressing one end under the zip tie, he carefully put the watch Jesse gave him into his pocket. After preparing himself mentally, Walter turned on the switch, using the short circuit to burn through the zip tie. Walter's ingenuity once again proved the power of knowledge. In contrast, Teabag, who was also once tied to a radiator, had to bite off his own hand to escape. Meanwhile, Mike hired Saul to defend him at the DEA, aiming to stop their illegal surveillance. After Saul's professional arguments, Mike gained the time needed to complete the methylamine deal. However, when Mike returned to the warehouse, he discovered that Walter had already moved the methylamine.
Hey, Mr. White's got an idea.
Count to 3.
Mike, I'm serious. It's a great idea. Look, you get your $5 million, we both do it, and he gets his all right? Just hear him out.
Is that true, Walter?
Everybody wins. Now, say my name.
This is one of the most iconic scenes in Breaking Bad, and it's also the moment when Walter's presence is at its peak. To protect the 1,000 gallons of methylamine he risked his life to obtain, Walter, along with Mike and Jesse, personally meets with Declan for negotiations. Although the name Heisenberg was already legendary in the underground world, they knew the name but had never met Heisenberg in person. Declan initially dismisses Walter with disdain but ultimately is impressed by Walter's strong negotiation tactics and asks who he is.
Who the hell are you?
You know. You all know exactly who I am. Say my name.
Do what? I don't have a damn clue who the hell you are.
I'm the man who killed Gus Fring.
Bullshit. Cartel got Fring.
You sure? That's right. Now, say my name.
Heisenberg.
You're goddamn right.
Clearly, Walter's negotiation was very successful, and he even secured Mike's $5 million retirement fund in advance. However, Jesse didn't have the same luck as Mike. Walter didn't secure any retirement fund for him, clearly indicating that he still wants Jesse to work for him. This situation also teaches us that if you want to resign, do it decisively and pursue what you truly find meaningful. Back at the warehouse, before Mike leaves, he reminds Walter that he will handle the hush money for his man. He tells Walter to quickly remove the bug in Hank's office because the DEA is going to conduct a thorough inspection soon. As Mike is about to leave, the triumphant Walter can't resist making a few sarcastic remarks.
That's it. No, thanks for the $5 million. Sorry for chaining you to a radiator. Just get the bug, Walter.
But Mike doesn't buy into any of it, because Jesse has gone through life and death situations with Mike. This has strengthened their bond. Jesse reluctantly shakes hands with Mike to say goodbye, while Walter lurks in the shadows, watching his employees like a boss. Afterward, Jesse helps Walter temporarily hide the methylamine at his car wash. With the money in hand, Mike hires a lawyer named Dan to go to the prison and pay off the hush money for his 9 men inside. This time, he asks for a large storage locker, filling it with cash, and leaves an envelope on top with a letter for his granddaughter Kaylee's 18th birthday. This clearly shows Mike's deep love for Kaylee. Later, Dan reports back to Mike, assuring him that everything is under control and there's no need to worry. Then Mike goes to the outskirts to continue monitoring Hank's office. He hears that Steven has obtained a search warrant that will be executed in about 2 hours. Upon hearing this, Mike begins to prepare for the DEA search. He throws his laptop and longtime belongings into a well. He then hides the money he needs for the journey in the trunk of his car. To avoid being caught by the DEA, Mike hides his car keys on a beam in the parking garage and takes a cab home to face the investigation. Mike barely has time to take a sip of water before the DEA arrives in full force. Hank flaunts his search warrant, unaware that Mike has everything under control. After searching for a long time without finding anything, Hank is left bewildered, staring at the calm and collected Mike. Although Hank's suspicions were spot on, he didn't know that the bug Walter planted monitored his every move. Back at the office, even during meetings with his superiors, Hank is still investigating Mike's case. After the meeting, his boss speaks to Hank alone, reprimanding him for spending too much time on Gus's case and reminding him that, as a director, he should oversee all cases. Upon learning that Hank personally led a search of Mike's house but came up empty-handed, his superior was furious and cut off all funding for Hank's investigation into Mike. Steven also indicated that Mike didn't seem like he was planning to flee, so they decided to drop the investigation into Mike. Subsequently, Hank turned his attention to the 9 people in prison, but they were tough and even the prospect of reduced sentences couldn't entice them to talk. Hank concluded that someone must have paid a substantial amount of hush money, otherwise, this didn't make sense. However, their investigation into the bank accounts of these individuals turned up no clues. Hank discovered that the defense lawyer for these individuals was the same person, a guy named Dan. So, he had Steven keep an eye on this lawyer. Sure enough, just as Hank suspected, when Dan went to the prison again to deliver the hush money, Steven caught him red-handed.
Hey.
Meanwhile, Walter had already set up a new secret lab on his own. Jesse approached Walter wanting to discuss quitting again. Although Walter knew Jesse's intention, he pretended to be clueless. He handed Jesse a pair of gloves and told him that they needed to double their production. Walter now acknowledges Jesse, saying that the contraband he produces can rival his own. But Jesse didn't buy it and insisted on his decision to quit. Helpless, Walter began to brainwash Jesse again.
The best at something? And what, you want to squander that potential? Your potential? Why? To do what?
I'll figure it out, all right?
Look at you. What have you got in your life? Huh? Nothing. Nobody. Oh, wait, yes. Video games and go-karts. Oh, and when you get tired of that, what then? Huh?
Walter then brought up the innocent boy who had died, saying he was just as sad and upset as Jesse, because after Walter watched the news about the boy's disappearance, he was still whistling nonchalantly. Faced with Walter's nonsense, Jesse directly confronted him. Walter realizes that his lie has been discovered and desperately tries to cover it up.
It's done! It makes me sick that it happened, just like everyone else who has died in our wake. What Todd did, you and I have done things that are just as bad. Yeah. We're already pretty much going there, right? But I'm not gonna lie down until I get there.
What, just because I don't want to more, I'm lying down? I'm done, okay? You just give me my money and you and we're done.
Seeing that Jesse was determined to leave, Walter dismissed him with a few curt words.
So stay and work with me, and you can make 10 times, 20 times as much.
You want to pay me? I don't care.
Yes, you do.
It's on you. All right.
Because if you leave, you get nothing. You understand me? Nothing! Jesse!
Helpless, Walter turned to Todd to be his assistant. Compared to Jesse when he first started learning from Walter, Todd, who hadn't even finished elementary school, seemed particularly diligent. It was evident that Todd valued Walter's mentorship and cherished this opportunity, as he even reviewed his notes during breaks. After a series of complex operations, Todd admitted he still needed more practice. Walter also noticed that Todd had some gaps compared to Jesse, who had learned some chemistry in high school. Walter was about to discuss Todd's pay, but Todd said they could talk about it once he got the hang of things. It must be said that Todd was quite sensible in this regard. Bosses always appreciate employees who focus on the work rather than the money. Then Walter went to Hank's office to continue his act. This back and forth was starting to irritate Hank, who thought, "I'm busy cracking the Heisenberg case. What are you doing here?" Little did he know that he was making coffee for Heisenberg himself. Walter seized the opportunity to quickly remove the bug and unplug the device from the computer. Just as they were awkwardly drinking coffee, Steven, who had just arrested Dan, came in to report to Hank. Steven said that Dan was willing to testify against Mike. Hank immediately sent people to arrest Mike. Walter overheard all of this. Meanwhile, Mike was at the park playing with his granddaughter when he received a call from Dan. Dan made an excuse to meet him and got his exact location. Mike then received a call from Walter.
The DEA, somebody flipped. They have some kind of bank surveillance and something about some lawyer. Someone is talking, Mike, and they're coming for you right now.
Hearing what Walter said, Mike wanted to say goodbye to Kaylee, but there wasn't enough time. He looked at his granddaughter on the swing with deep sorrow. Little did he know that this goodbye would be forever. Walter and Jesse went to Saul to discuss their options. If Mike got caught and confessed, the three of them would go down as well. However, Jesse firmly believed that Mike wouldn't rat them out. Walter also trusted Mike's integrity but didn't trust the 9 men in prison. Without the hush money, they might confess. At that moment, Mike called Saul because he couldn't go to the parking lot to pick up his package with the DEA on his tail. Mike asked Saul to deliver it instead, but Saul, as Mike's defense lawyer, feared he might be under DEA surveillance and didn't want to take the risk. Jesse volunteered to help Mike, but Mike kindly refused. Seeing both options fall through, Walter hastily took on the task. After getting the key, Walter checked Mike's package. Besides some cash and a passport, there was a gun inside. Before handing over the package, Walter demanded that Mike give him the names of his 9 men in prison. Mike ignored him and grabbed his package.
Goodbye, Walter.
You're welcome. I want those names, Mike. You owe me that much.
I don't owe you a damn thing. All of this, falling apart like this, is on you.
Wow.
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a... We had Fring. We had a lab. We had everything we needed and it all ran like clockwork. You just had to be the man. If you'd done your job, known your place, we'd all be fine right now.
Mike's words enraged the now darkened Walter. Walter rushed back to his car, retrieved something, and hurried towards Mike. In his car, Mike checked his package and realized the gun was missing. Mike never thought that Walter would kill him. Seeing that Mike had escaped, Walter chased him all the way to the river. Mike still had a gun but chose to leave peacefully rather than confront Walter. At this moment, Walter is a bit panicked, and he keeps on justifying his behavior.
I just realized that Lydia has the names. I can get them from her. I'm sorry, Mike.
Up. Let me die in peace.
And so, the most steadfast character in Breaking Bad met his end. Although Mike was part of a criminal enterprise, his death leaves us feeling sorrowful. Because of Mike's tenacity and dedication, he was always determined to carry out Gus's plan, and could be considered as the most stable executor. At the same time, he strictly adhered to his principles, never crossing the line or getting greedy, and always maintained his love for his family. Which character do you prefer, Mike or Walter? This is Walter's darkest moment in Breaking Bad. As the mastermind, he orchestrated the murder of 10 informants in prison in just 2 minutes. This cleared the path for him to establish his vast business empire, because Walter couldn't get the names of Mike's men in prison from Mike. After disposing of Mike's body, Walter immediately arranged to meet Lydia. Who knew the names? Shrewd Lydia had a backup plan. She didn't hand over the list to Walter easily, fearing he would kill her once he had it. Last time, Lydia saved her life by giving Walter information on acquiring a large supply of methylamine when she was on the brink of death. This time, Lydia also set a condition for Walter not to kill her. Lydia promised that, given her position, she could help Walter expand into overseas markets. This perfectly aligned with Walter's grand ambition to build a commercial empire. Walter was still somewhat skeptical of Lydia's plan. If the overseas market was so lucrative, why didn't she offer this channel to Gus? Lydia explained that she had already reached an agreement with Gus, but unfortunately, Gus didn't live to see it. Seeing that Walter had no objections, Lydia confidently wrote down the names of Mike's men.
Shaker, we're going to make a lot of money together.
After Lydia left, Walter gently lifted his hat, revealing the ricin he had prepared. This confirmed Lydia's fears were justified, but once again, she used her skills to escape a life-threatening situation. Walter, therefore, gained an unexpected advantage. Back home, he hid the ricin back into the outlet, hinting that Walter would use it again in the future. Walter then approached Todd's uncle, Jack, to help eliminate the informants on the list. Todd had mentioned that his uncle had connections in the prison, while Jack and the others worked out the details of the assassination plan. Walter stared at a worn painting on the wall. This painting had appeared back in the distant second season. At that time, Walter and Jesse had just escaped Tuco's grasp, and Walter faked amnesia to get into the hospital. The painting of a man rowing away from his family symbolized Walter's growing distance from his own family. Now, with the painting reappearing, Walter was not only further from his family, but he was also losing himself. Jack and his men discussed for a long time and finally said they could kill a few of the targets, but not within 2 minutes. However, Walter didn't compromise and insisted they follow his timeline. It was evident that Walter spent a significant amount of money on this. The next day, Walter, at home, started the timer. Within 2 minutes, the 9 informants in prison, along with Dan, Mike's lawyer, were all dead. When the 2 minutes were up, Walter received a call right on time.
It's done.
Hank then received the news of the murders and was furious. Prior to this, Hank had already arranged a deal with the former manager of Gus's laundromat to take his statement the next day. Fuming, Hank went home and ran into Walter, who was there visiting his daughter. In his foul mood, Hank drank with Walter, complaining about how hard it was to catch a criminal mastermind. Little did he know, Walter was the one orchestrating everything behind the scenes. Thus, Walter finally entered his phase of frenzied money-making, because Walter has been complaining since season 1 that Jesse's sales are too slow and the risk he's taking isn't proportional to the reward. Later, he worked for Gus, but he was always just an employee. After Gus's death, he partnered with Jesse and Mike, but a portion of their earnings was taken by Mike's men as hush money, so Walter never made money in the most efficient way. Starting from this episode, Walter took Gus's place, Todd replaced Jesse, and Lydia replaced Gus's partner who had committed suicide out of guilt. This new combination began to operate with true efficiency, until the end. Even Walter himself didn't expect to make so much money.
How much is this?
I have no earthly idea. I truly don't. There is more money here than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. I certainly can't launder it. Not with 100 car washes. I want my life back. Please tell me. How much is enough? How big does this pile have to be?
Seeing the piles of cash and hearing Skylar's persuasion, Walter's ambition was finally satisfied. Walter realized it was time to quit, so he went to the hospital for a thorough checkup to see if he still had time to spend the money. Although Walter didn't wait for the final results, the director showed us a familiar prop again. It was the metal box that an emotionally out-of-control Walter had punched with his bare hands back in the second season. Walter had seen a large white area on his lung in the scans and thought his days were numbered, so he dragged Jesse to the desert to create contraband in a frenzy. Due to Jesse's carelessness, they almost got trapped in the desert. Feeling that he had skirted death twice, Walter's final diagnosis showed his condition had improved. Though it should have been good news, Walter felt as if he had been played. Walter then sought out Jesse, whom he hadn't seen for a long time. Since their last fallout, Jesse had come to ask Walter about Mike the next day. At that time, Walter was preparing for Todd to dispose of Mike's body. Walter said that Mike was gone, but Jesse didn't catch the deeper meaning. He then asked what would happen to the 9 men in prison. Walter replied it had nothing to do with him anymore and then drove Jesse away. Since then, they hadn't contacted each other. When Walter saw Jesse again, there was an awkward tension between them. Jesse had learned from Saul that Walter had eliminated all the informants within 2 minutes. Filling him with fear of Walter, they awkwardly reminisced about their past but quickly ran out of things to say.
So, hey, I gotta get going. Just meeting up with some friends.
I gotta get going as well.
I left something for you.
Jesse nervously opened a package only to find it was the $5 million Walter owed him. Jesse had thought Walter came to kill him and had even armed himself for self-defense, but it turned out he was overthinking. Although Walter had become extremely dark, he never intended to kill Jesse. This showed that Walter's feelings for Jesse were akin to those for his own child. Relieved, Walter returned home and finally said the words Skylar had been waiting to hear.
I'm out.
Deciding to quit, Walter began to reclaim his old self and life. The family gatherings were once again filled with laughter, and Skylar's long-lost smile reappeared. Just when everyone thought the show could end on a perfect note, a massive twist arrived. Hank had an upset stomach and went to the bathroom. Out of boredom, he picked up a book lying on the toilet. Unfortunately, it was Gail's copy of Leaves of Grass. At the beginning of the episode, when Walter was taking a shower, the camera had already shown this book, foreshadowing Hank finding it at the end of the episode. Seeing Gail's handwritten dedication on the title page, Hank immediately remembered the time he and Walter were reviewing Gail's files together.
Willy Wonka, Woodrow Wilson, Walter White.
You got me.
Hank suddenly lost the urge to relieve himself. He quickly pulled up his pants and walked out. trembling, unable to believe what he had just found. Then Hank secretly hid the book in Marie's bag and dragged Marie back with him on the pretext that he had a tummy ache. At this moment, Hank couldn't even look Walter in the eye, but Walter had no idea that his disaster was about to unfold. On the way home, Hank was sweating profusely from fear, his mind blank and vision blurred.
Hank? 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 Okay.
The Walter who had been hiding in plain sight was finally discovered, a result of his own pride and arrogance. Because of Gail's admiration, Walter couldn't bring himself to get rid of the Leaves of Grass book that contained Gail's handwriting. Breaking Bad Season 5 consists of 16 episodes, and the next 8 will showcase the series' most brilliant moments. Let's wait and see. This is Hank's most panicked moment in Breaking Bad. He never imagined that the Heisenberg he had been hunting all along would turn out to be his own brother-in-law, Walter. Hank couldn't believe it was true, so he hurried home to get Gail's files from before. After carefully comparing, Hank found that the notes in the 2 books were written by the same person. The thing Hank feared most had come true. He called in sick and took a few days off, specifically telling Marie not to inform Skylar about this. Marie told Hank to rest well at home and not to think about work. However, the next second, Hank's subordinate delivered all the information about the Heisenberg case. Eager to solve the case, Hank quickly closed the garage door and started examining the materials. He laid out all the files and watched the video of Walter and Jesse stealing methylamine from the chemical plant in the south of the city. Watching the movements of one of the people in the video, Hank felt a sense of familiarity. It was clear that Walter was the final piece of this huge puzzle. Meanwhile, Walter was discussing with his wife how to launder the money quickly. Little did he know that Hank had already begun secretly investigating him. At this moment, they were wearing light-colored clothes, symbolizing their transition from darkness to light. But just then, Lydia came to find Walter. Due to Walter's retirement, the purity of Lydia's exported contraband had plummeted. She begged Walter to come back and guide them for a week, but Walter flatly refused. Skylar, observant as ever, noticed that Lydia's car was rented. Generally, no one would spend money to wash a rented car, so she asked Walter what was going on. Walter no longer concealed the truth and told her everything. Next, Skylar was full of authority. She issued a stern warning and drove Lydia away.
Get out of here. Now. Excuse me? Never come back here. Do you understand me?
At the same time, Jesse, having received $5 million, was in a state of confusion, because when Jesse was ready to quit and asked Walter for money, Walter's harsh words drove him away.
Why do you want this money?
Because it's mine? It's my cut?
But isn't it filthy blood money? I mean, you're so pure, you have such emotional depth. No, you shouldn't touch that dirty money. I'll save you from that, Jesse.
Unexpectedly, those words had a profound impact on Jesse. Feeling hopeless, Jesse took the $5 million and found Saul. He asked Saul to give $5 million to the parents of the innocent boy they killed while stealing the methylamine, and the remaining $5 million to Mike's granddaughter Kaylee. Saul, seeing Jesse's unusual behavior, said that doing so would only complicate matters. Feeling disappointed that Saul wouldn't follow his request, Jesse got up to leave with the money. Saul realized Jesse was not in a good state, so he hurriedly agreed to Jesse's request. After Jesse left, Saul immediately contacted Walter and informed him of Jesse's unusual behavior. Walter was receiving N4 at the hospital at that moment, indicating his health was not in good condition. After leaving the hospital, Walter went straight to Jesse's house with 2 bags of money. He advised Jesse to forget the past and focus on the life ahead. Walter asked Jesse why he wanted to give money to Mike's granddaughter. Jesse thought Mike had been killed by Walter, but Walter denied it and spoke convincingly. The biggest difference between Walter and Jesse now was that Walter wouldn't let past events affect his future. Back home, the family of 3 finally had a reunion dinner like they used to. During dinner, Walter suddenly felt unwell and hurried to the bathroom to vomit. It seemed that his lung cancer symptoms had recurred. He knelt by the toilet to catch his breath, and at that moment, he noticed that the copy of Leaves of Grass with Gail's handwriting was missing from the top of the toilet, but he remembered clearly that Leaves of Grass was on the toilet. Walter searched for a long time but couldn't find it. He asked Skylar if she had seen the book, but she didn't even know that such a book existed in their house. After getting into bed, Walter ponders for a moment and then asks Skylar about Hank. Ironically, Hank had specifically told Marie not to tell Skylar about his matters. However, when Walter asked Skylar about Hank, she knew all about it. She said Hank seemed to have a stomach flu and hadn't been to work for a week. Hearing this, Walter fell into deep thought. After Skylar fell asleep, Walter quietly slipped out. He searched around in the car, and eventually, his worst fears were confirmed. Remember this kind of tracker? It was the same method Hank had used to investigate Gus before. Walter realized that Hank knew things he shouldn't know, so the next day he went to confront him. Seeing Walter, Hank hurriedly stuffed the investigative files into a box. Facing Walter, Hank appeared somewhat flustered. After a few awkward pleasantries, neither of them broke the ice, and their conversation was markedly less relaxed than before. Seeing that Hank wasn't going to bring up the matter, Walter exchanged a few more greetings and was about to leave. But in the end, Walter couldn't help but question Hank.
You're gonna laugh, but I have to ask you about this. Believe it or not, I found this on my car. I mean, it looks just like the GPS tracker that we used on Gus Fring, doesn't it? Back when we were tracking him, just the two of us. You wouldn't know anything about this, would you, Hank?
Realizing his tricks were exposed, Hank stopped pretending. He picked up the remote and closed the garage door.
Because you. All along it was you! You drove into traffic to keep me from that laundry.
Calm down.
That call I got. Tell me Marie was in the hospital. I was in Kingpin. You had my cell number. You killed 10 witnesses to save your. You bombed a nursing home. Heisenberg.
Hank, my cancer is back.
Good. Right, you son of a.
I want to beat this thing. I do. I'm back on chemo and I am fighting like hell. You were able to convince anyone that I was capable of doing these things. You and I both know I would never see the inside of a jail cell. What's the point?
Skylar, bring the kids here. And then we'll talk.
That is not going to happen.
I don't even know who I'm talking to.
If you don't know who I am, then...
Some of Walter's words at the end also meant he had no choice but to declare war on Hank. Walter, who had intended to retire, was once again played by fate. Such is the unpredictability of life. How would you react if you saw that much money in person?
I gotta do it, man. Jesus, Mary and Joseph.
Hubie told Huel to get up and get to work, but Huel was unresponsive. He wanted to experience lying on $80 million before working.
Ah, screw it.
Just moments ago, Hank discovered that Walter is Heisenberg. So that Hank doesn't catch the evidence, Saul advises Walter to move the stolen money as quickly as possible. So, Saul's two subordinates received the important task of transferring $80 million in cash. This marked the official beginning of the showdown between Walter and Hank. Right after leaving Hank's house, Walter hurriedly tried to contact his wife, but Skylar's phone was constantly busy. Looking back, it turned out Hank had already contacted Skylar. In a panic, Walter drifted and sped all the way to the car wash, but he was still a step behind Hank. At that moment, Hank was secretly meeting with Skylar. He expressed sympathy for Skylar's situation and understood why she had suddenly walked into the pool back then. He urged Skylar to recall Walter's misdeeds carefully and took out a tape recorder to record evidence. Clearly, Skylar was not mentally prepared at that moment. She knew that if Walter got arrested, she couldn't escape either. Facing Hank's urgent questioning, the shrewd Skylar saw through Hank's anger towards Walter and his determination to catch him by any means necessary. Skylar also realized that Hank didn't have the evidence to arrest Walter yet, so she chose to stand by Walter's side.
Am I under arrest? Am I under arrest? Hank, are you arresting me? Am I under arrest?
As soon as Skylar came out, she immediately contacted Walter. Saul, worried that Hank might be tapping Skylar's phone, quickly told Walter to take out the phone battery. Walter was angry at Skylar for going to see Hank without his permission. Saul subtly suggested if Walter could send Hank to the same place where Mike went. At first, Walter didn't get it, but when he did, he cursed Saul out. Even though Walter was a bad guy, he still had his limits. Family was always the most important, and he would never harm Hank. Meanwhile, Saul's two subordinates had successfully brought the $80 million out of the warehouse. Walter carefully counted the money and found that not a cent was missing. Then he casually loaded a bag of notes for their hard work. After arranging everything, Walter drove alone to a remote area. He was going to bury all the money. At the same time, Skylar, unable to reach Walter, was extremely anxious. She hurriedly contacted Saul, but Saul, not trusting Skylar, did not reveal Walter's whereabouts to her. Just then, Marie and Hank came in to confront her. Faced with Marie's questioning, Skylar was speechless. It was only then that Marie realized she had known about Walter's actions since her sister lied about his gambling.
I am so sorry. You won't talk. You won't talk to Hank because you think that Walt is going to get away with this.
Skylar, slapped by Marie, did not retaliate, but what she never expected was that Marie would want to take her daughter away. Seeing Skylar trying to stop her, Marie called Hank over to help take the child. If Skylar really called the police, who knows who would end up worse off. Fortunately, Hank was rational enough to angrily reprimand Marie and return the child to Skylar. The sisters were now completely estranged. We're curious about their childhoods and what kind of parents raised such different children. Although the show doesn't delve into this, from the limited plot, we can see that the sisters don't seem to have much in common. Walter is still digging, and he has to do it himself. He worked from morning till night, using all his strength to bury the 8 barrels of cash. To remember the burial location, the clever Walter bought a GPS tracker and memorized the coordinates. In the next scene, a lottery ticket with precise coordinates was pinned to Walter's refrigerator. This lottery ticket serves as a plot device for later. Seeing Walter covered in dust, Skylar guessed that he had moved the money. Before Skylar could explain her meeting with Hank, the exhausted Walter collapsed to the ground. A few hours later, Walter slowly regained consciousness, and Skylar guessed that his cancer had returned. Walter was ready to turn himself in and asked his wife to promise to leave the money for their children, but Skylar pointed out that from Hank's behavior, it was clear he didn't have enough evidence to prove their crimes. Even if Walter turned himself in, they couldn't keep the $80 million, so Skylar suggested that Walter lie low for now. As Skylar predicted, when Marie urged Hank to arrest Walter, Hank admitted he didn't have solid evidence and couldn't involve his colleagues. Remember Hank's boss George? George was fired simply for being too close to Gus. The relationship between Hank and Walter was much closer. If Hank reported Walter, he could lose his job and possibly face repercussions. If Hank didn't go public, he could be seen as covering up. If someone else uncovered Walter's crimes, Hank's career would be over. Hank was truly in a difficult position. To avoid suspicion, Hank went to work as usual, putting Walter's case on hold for now. Hank planned to proactively contact his boss, requesting to follow up on other cases, indicating that he was temporarily giving up the investigation of Walter. However, when Hank heard some news, he saw a new glimmer of hope for arresting Walter, because in the past few days, Jesse hadn't been idle. He couldn't accept the $5 million in dirty money, haunted by the thought of the innocent boy they accidentally killed. Jesse's conscience tormented him. To ease his guilt, Jesse dumped all the money into people's yards in the middle of the night, scattering it everywhere. Finally, Jesse, looking like a madman, lay dazed on a carousel in the park and ended up being taken to the police station. When Hank heard the news, he rushed over, hoping to get some useful information from Jesse. Do you think a mentally shattered Jesse would cooperate with Hank? After a year of investigation, Hank finally discovered that Heisenberg was actually his brother-in-law, Walter White. Reflecting on the past year's baffling events, Hank realized that everything suddenly made sense. Many American TV shows explore the complexities of human nature, but few do it as richly and uniquely as Breaking Bad. Hank's career and personal life were the epitome of success. In his career, he was the head of the local DEA, tirelessly working on cases and frequently making headlines in local news for his successful busts. Personally, Hank enjoyed a comfortable, upper-middle-class life and even had his own homebrew beer business. Compared to his brother-in-law Walter, Hank felt an undeniable sense of superiority. This was evident from Walter's 50th birthday party, where Hank was the most exuberant person in the room, almost as if the party were thrown for him. Besides Hank, the only other person brimming with superiority was Marie. Like Hank, Marie always considered herself the center of attention in any situation. However, after discovering Walter's true identity, Hank's sense of superiority crumbled. As an agent of justice, Hank had a duty to investigate Walter, but as a family member, he could choose to cover for him, a decision fraught with enormous risk. While Hank was grappling with this dilemma, he learned that a mentally shattered Jesse Pinkman had been brought to the police station. Hank hoped Jesse could provide a breakthrough. Hank noticed Jesse's distressed state, likely due to a falling out with Walter, and offered to use his influence to get Jesse out of the station in exchange for cooperation. Apparently Hank didn't understand Jesse's true feelings, and because of their previous problems, Jesse didn't agree to work with him. Before Hank finished talking, Saul learned the news and came to the police station immediately. Seeing Saul arrive, Hank cooperatively left the scene. A dejected Hank returned home, where Marie urgently inquired about the progress. Learning that Hank had not yet exposed Walter's identity, Marie became anxious, fearing the repercussions on her if others discovered Walter's true identity. Hank retorted that he lacked sufficient evidence and needed more clues, angrily telling Marie not to interfere with his work. Meanwhile, Walter devised a countermeasure. He recorded a video and then arranged a meeting with Hank and Marie to negotiate. At this point, the colors of all four of their clothes are more representative. Walter and Skylar wore outfits signifying their attempts to cleanse themselves, while Hank wore deep blue, representing his dogged pursuit of Heisenberg. In a moment of lost sanity, Marie screamed for Walter to die. Family ties shattered into enmity, underscored by her choice of black clothing to highlight the darkness of human nature. During the negotiation, Walter sought a peaceful resolution, asking Hank to abandon his investigation, but Hank and Marie were merciless, clearly intent on bringing Walter down. Despite feeling uneasy, Walter sensed that Hank lacked concrete evidence. Seeing no further point in continuing, a disappointed Walter got up to leave, but not before dropping off his pre-recorded confession video. Watching the video, one couldn't help but admire Walter's meticulous planning.
My name is Walter Hartwell White. I live at 308 Negra Arroyo Lane, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87104. This is my confession. If you're watching this tape, I'm probably dead. Murdered by my brother-in-law, Hank Schrader. Hank has been building a meth for over a year now and using me. Shortly after my 50th birthday, he asked that I use my chemistry knowledge to... I didn't want my family to go into financial ruin, so I agreed. Hank had a partner, a businessman named Gustavo Fring. Hank sold me into servitude to this man. And when I tried to quit, Fring threatened my family. I didn't know where to turn. Working with a man named Hector Salamanca, he plotted to kill Fring. The bomb that he used was built by me. And he gave me no option in that Hank had risen to become the head of the Albuquerque DEA. To keep me in line, he took my children. For 3 months, he kept them. I hated myself for what I had brought upon my family. Recently, I tried once again to quit, and in response, he gave me this. I can't take this anymore. I live in fear every day that Hank will kill me. All I could think to do was to make this video and hope that the world will finally see this man for what he really is.
Though the video was filled with lies, some of the facts could not withstand scrutiny. If the case implicated Hank, he would be the first to be suspended, given the suspicion cast by their familial relationship. Moreover, Hank's obsession with the Heisenberg case could easily be interpreted as complicity. George was an example. He was dismissed after merely getting close to Gus Fring. Hank's involvement would be undeniable, especially since he had indeed spent Walter's illicit money. Faced with these lies and the harsh reality of their medical expenses, Hank and Marie were left bewildered. Hank was powerless against Walter's investigation. Hank's determination to bring down Walter had both personal and professional motivations. His unwavering sense of justice was indeed admirable. On the other hand, Marie's hatred for Walter was mostly personal. She firmly believed that seeing Walter brought to justice was the right course of action. Marie's wish for Walter to commit suicide was simply a means to avoid any responsibility for using Walter's illicit money for Hank's rehabilitation. Marie's thoughts were always self-centered, making her one of the most disliked characters in the entire series. However, behind the scenes, the actress playing Marie must have made significant sacrifices. Portraying a character that everyone hates is no easy task, as it is meant to highlight the protagonist's moral dilemmas. Therefore, it's important to watch the show with a rational perspective and not harbor extreme hatred towards a particular character, nor direct verbal attacks at the actor in real life. What kind of hatred could drive an enraged Jesse to storm into Walter's house, dousing it with gasoline? He vowed to burn the entire house to the ground. Just half a day earlier, Jesse, freshly released from the police station, was invited by Walter to have a heart-to-heart in a remote location, fearing that a mentally unstable Jesse might cause trouble. Walter, who was ready to retire from the contraband business, suggested that Jesse disappear and start a new life. Although Jesse's been in a very bad mood for a few days, he's still got his head on straight. He knew that Hank had already discovered Walter's identity as Heisenberg, so he unleashed his anger on Walter.
Can you just stop working me for like 10 seconds straight? Stop jerking me around. All right, just drop the whole concerned dad thing and tell me the truth. I mean, you're acting like me leaving town is, I mean, you need me gone, because your dickhead brother-in-law is never gonna let up. Just say so. Just tell me you don't give a shit about me, and it's either this, or you'll kill me the same way you killed Mike. Just tell me you need this.
Walter did not argue against Jesse's accusations. Instead, he embraced Jesse tightly, like a concerned elder. The scene changes. Saul has contacted the connector, but also according to Walter's request to bring him enough startup funds. Feeling downcast, Jesse wanted to use some contraband to calm his nerves, but Saul informed him that the fixer didn't work with addicts. To ensure Jesse could leave smoothly, Saul asked him to surrender the remaining contraband. However, Jesse, stubborn as always, ignored the advice and pocketed the remaining contraband. Unbeknownst to Jesse, Huel, acting on Saul's orders, had swapped the contraband from Jesse's pocket as he was leaving. While waiting for the car, a bored Jesse wanted to relax, only to find that the contraband he had hidden was missing. When he found a cigarette instead, Jesse instantly realized that Huel had stolen it. This led him to conclude that Huel must have also taken the rice and cigarette, with Walter orchestrating the theft. So, Jesse abandoned his plans for a new life and decided to go back and settle the score with Walter, who had deceived him. The scene of Jesse waiting for the car was quite symbolic. The square stone blocks with slanted shadows in the background resembled rows of tombstones. It was as if Jesse was declaring that his former identity was dead, with his last presence in this graveyard-like place. Once Jesse boarded that car to the future, his new life would begin. However, upon realizing everything because of the cigarette, Jesse had a choice: to escape everything or confront Walter and end it all. The road signs for left and right turns in the bottom left corner were quite clear, reflecting Jesse's moment of decision. Enraged, Jesse stormed into Saul's office. A bewildered Saul, unaware of the situation, was met with Jesse's furious assault. As the injured Saul reached for a gun to defend himself, Jesse quickly disarmed him. Under Jesse's intense interrogation, Saul confessed that Huel had stolen the rice and cigarette and shifted the blame onto Walter. Seizing Saul's car keys, Jesse drove off to confront Walter. This led to the scene we saw at the beginning. The injured Saul, sensing trouble, hurried to inform the unaware Walter. Upon receiving the news, Walter didn't want to alarm Skylar. He excused himself, saying he needed to fix the vending machine, and retrieved the revolver hidden inside. He then made another excuse about picking up medicine from the pharmacy and headed home. Seeing Saul's car parked in front of the house, a cautious Walter sneaked in through the backyard. However, once inside, Walter found the house empty, with gasoline soaked into the carpet. Walter was puzzled, thinking Jesse was truly a troublesome kid. To prevent Jesse from harming his family, Walter arranged for Huel to secretly protect Skylar and Walter Jr. Then Walter attempted to contact Jesse.
Jesse, listen, man, I know you're angry. I want to fix this, okay? We'll talk and we will fix this. Sleep it off, okay? And then call me. Be safe.
He hired a professional cleaning crew to remove the gasoline from the house, aiming to restore everything before Skylar returned from work. He knew his inquisitive wife wouldn't let it go otherwise. Walter could still smell gasoline despite the cleaning crew's repeated efforts. When the crew said they had cleaned thoroughly, Walter pulled out more money.
Until you pull this up and get new carpet, new padding, this is as good as it gets.
It seemed that money couldn't solve this problem, but how could this stump the master of lies, Walter? What he did next would astound you. He soaked his clothes in gasoline, even dousing his beloved car. When Skylar came home from work, she found a bizarre scene. Walter blamed a malfunctioning gas pump at the gas station for the gasoline smell. He felt his explanation perfectly shifted the blame to the gas station, but Skylar, with her keen intuition, remained unconvinced. Sensing Walter was lying, Walter suggested they temporarily move to a hotel, treating it like a vacation. His son readily agreed. In front of Walter Jr., Skylar went along with Walter's lie. That night, Walter slipped out of the hotel to ask Saul about Jesse's whereabouts, but Saul's man QB reported that they hadn't found Jesse anywhere in town. Walter instructed them to keep looking. Saul questioned Walter on what he planned to do if they found Jesse. Without much thought, Walter intended to resolve things peacefully with Jesse, but Saul hinted at eliminating Jesse. Hearing this, Walter angrily rebuked Saul.
Do not float that idea again. Find him.
Skylar, hiding in the room, witnessed Walter secretly meeting with Saul. Walter's life fell apart, and he had to confess to Skylar that he and Jesse had a disagreement, promising to resolve it quickly. Skylar then realized that Jesse was the one who tried to burn down their house. For the safety of herself and her family, Skylar suggested that Walter should get rid of Jesse, viewing him as a constant threat. Both Saul, who had been beaten up by Jesse, and the increasingly dark Skylar wanted to take action against Jesse. Do you think Walter will listen to them and eliminate Jesse? This is the biggest plot twist in the classic American TV series Breaking Bad, and it is the most devastating setback Walter has ever faced. By the end, you can't help but admit that this is a textbook-level drama series. Picking up from the previous episode, what Walter never expected was that just as Jesse was about to burn down his house, Hank suddenly appeared with a gun and stopped the agitated Jesse in time. Because Hank had been secretly monitoring Jesse beforehand, he ordered Jesse to put out the fire. Seeing Jesse's deep hatred for Walter, Hank, who also despised Walter, agreed to bring Walter to justice. Thus, these two former adversaries began to cooperate. Just as Hank's car was leaving, Walter arrived at his doorstep from the car wash, perfectly missing the critical information. This laid the groundwork for Walter's tragic fate later on. Hank didn't dare to take Jesse to the DEA office but brought him to his own house instead. Worried that Marie might disagree, Hank packed Marie's bags in advance and sent her to a hotel for a few days. Seeing Jesse brought into their home, Marie only cared about whether this would be detrimental to Walter. As she seemed willing to do anything against Walter, Marie reminded him that a phone was ringing. It turned out to be Jesse's phone. Hank overheard Walter's message to Jesse.
Jesse, listen, obviously, you've changed your mind here. I want to fix this, okay? Whatever it takes. We'll talk and we will fix this. Till then, just sleep it off, okay? And then call me. Be safe.
When Jesse wakes up, he sees Marie, which makes him look a little constrained.
Would you like some coffee?
At this point, Hank has called Steven to help him, and he's ready to record Jesse's statement against Walter, but Jesse claimed that Walter had already quit the contraband trade, and now there was no substantial evidence to accuse Walter of any crime. Steven felt helpless about this. At this point, Hank found a breakthrough in the case.
I'm gonna be at Civic Plaza tomorrow at noon. I hope you'll give me the chance to explain myself. Talk through everything once and for all. I'll be alone and unarmed. So if you want to come and shoot me in the head, that's up to you. Either way, I'm in your hands.
This was also Walter's heartfelt confession. Hank asked Jesse to meet with Walter and preemptively installed a listening device on him, but Jesse didn't trust Walter at all, fearing that this was a trap set by Walter, and that once he showed up, Walter's hired killers would take him out. However, Hank didn't think so. Based on Jesse's testimony, the astute Hank saw that Walter cared for Jesse. This is what they call the onlooker seeing more clearly than the participant. Naive Jesse couldn't see Walter's care and protection for him. Jesse strongly opposed Hank's proposal, But in his current predicament, he had no choice. If he didn't follow Hank's orders, he would face prison time. Stephen was also concerned about the potential danger to Jesse, but Hank asserted that even if Jesse got killed, they could record evidence. This shows that Hank was willing to go to any lengths to capture Walter. The next day, under Hank's plan, they secretly recorded Walter's actions. After Hank set up the listening device on Jesse, Jesse nervously walked toward Walter's location. At that moment, Jesse suddenly saw a man in black staring at him from the corner, and he concluded that this was the hitman Walter had arranged in advance. Terrified, Jesse stopped in his tracks, hesitated for a moment, and then turned and walked away. Jesse then went to a phone booth where he thought he was smart enough to contact Walter.
I'm not doing what you want anymore. Okay, asshole?
This is just a heads up to let you know I'm coming for you. See, I decided that burning down your house is nothing.
Next time I'm gonna get you where you really live.
Jesse, listen.
Jesse? Jesse?
In this way, Jesse didn't give Walter a chance to explain, and Walter left in disappointment. The man Jesse saw was just a stranger playing with his child in the square. Feeling smug, Jesse was glad he didn't fall for Walter's trap, but this infuriated Hank.
What were you thinking? What the hell was that all about, huh? I little...
To get him, there's another way.
It seemed Jesse had a better idea. Deeply disappointed, Walter finally decided to take action against Jesse. Walter sought help from Todd's uncle Jack, but Jack's condition was that Walter teach them how to produce contraband. Since Todd had been involved in Walter's business, Jack knew that this trade was much more lucrative than their previous extermination work. With no other choice, Walter agreed. However, due to Todd's lack of skill, the quality of the contraband dropped sharply, which made Lydia very anxious. To eliminate Jesse as a threat, the reluctant Walter had no choice but to agree.
Time is of the essence, do you understand?
Do him tonight if you want. Just tell me where he is.
I don't know where he is, but I know how to flush him out.
In order to successfully draw Jesse out, Walter contacted Jesse's ex-girlfriend, Andrea. Walter claimed that he had done everything he could to not find Jesse and wanted Andrea's help in reaching him. After Walter left, he notified Jack and his men, who were lying in wait, to take Jesse out and dispose of his body as soon as he appeared. Walter didn't want Andrea and the child to see this, but what Walter never expected was that Hank intercepted the voicemail. Meanwhile, Jesse provided a crucial clue to catch Walter. They needed to find his stash of money. Although Jesse didn't know the exact location, he knew that Saul's two men were definitely involved. So they came up with a plan. Hank poured freshly bought pig brains on the ground and added some pig blood to create the illusion that Jesse had been killed. Then they went to trick Saul's man, Huel. Hank told Huel that Walter had already dealt with QB and Jesse, and now Huel was the only one left, keeping him there to protect the witness. Then he showed Huel the fake death photo of Jesse. Huel was scared to tears and confessed all the details of how he helped Walter move the money, but he didn't know where Walter had hidden it. Upon learning that the vehicle Walter used to move the money was rented, they hurried to investigate its information. After Hank's investigation, they were disappointed to find that the car didn't have a GPS installed. Just when they thought the trail had gone cold, the clever Hank came up with another sneaky plan. To make Walter reveal the location of the money, Hank forged a photo of the barrels where Walter had hidden the cash and sent it to Walter. Seeing these photos, Walter was terrified. Then Jesse called.
Got my photo? That barrel looked familiar because I just found 6 more exactly like it.
Hearing what Jesse said, Walter didn't have time to explain to his wife and immediately rushed to the place where he had hidden the money.
Yes. How do you like that, genius? Guess you didn't think of everything.
Look, Jesse, I don't know what you plan on doing here, but...
Well, I'll give you a hint, Walt. It involves a couple of 5-gallon cans of gasoline and a lighter.
No, Jesse, please, listen to me.
No, you listen to me, bitch. You get your ass out here as fast as you can.
Yes, I'm coming, okay?
All right, well, you better hurry, because I'm burning 10 grand a minute till you get here, starting right now.
I said I'm coming. Don't you touch my money.
All the way, Walter kept talking to Jesse on the phone. At this moment, Walter didn't have time to think much. He was walking step by step into Hank's trap.
I'm dying. My cancer is bad. You're not hurting anyone but my family. Okay? Look, I can't spend this money. It's not for me. I won't be around long enough to use it. It belongs to my children.
Oh, you're gonna talk about kids. You're seriously gonna go there?
I am sorry. about Brock.
No, you're not.
I am.
You're not, but you're gonna be.
Yes, I am sorry about Brock. Don't you think I knew exactly how much to give him? I ran over those gangbangers. I killed Emilio and Crazy 8Y. I did all of those things to try to save your life as much as mine. Only you're too stupid to know it.
The angry Walter also spoke from his heart. He had indeed done a lot for Jesse, but unfortunately, Jesse couldn't see it. At that moment, Jesse fell silent because Hank had tracked Walter's location through the call. There was no need for Walter to continue talking to Jesse to prevent Jesse from being swayed by him again. When Walter arrived at the place where the money was hidden, he found no one there. It was then that Walter realized he had been duped. He quickly removed the battery from his phone and threw it away. Walter then climbed to a high point to observe the surroundings but found nothing unusual. Just as Walter was about to stop and catch his breath, he saw a car speeding towards him in the distance. He quickly went back to pick up the discarded phone and reinserted the battery. Walter was certain that Jesse had come prepared and wasn't alone, so he urgently called Jack and the others for support, providing them with the exact coordinates. However, when Walter saw that it was Jesse accompanied by Hank and Steven, he felt utterly despairing. After a moment of thought, Walter told Jack and the others not to come, but his tone was filled with helplessness. Walter then hung up the phone. This action left Jack and the others puzzled. Hearing Hank loudly ordering him to surrender, Walter wept in despair, knowing he was trapped. Thus, under Hank's command, Walter was finally captured by Hank. At this point, Jesse flashed an infuriating, foolish grin. Faced with his family, Walter chose to surrender rather than continue down a dark path, which made us sympathize with him once again. Hank, proud of his cleverness, began to boast about his achievement, but Walter ignored his flaunting and stared intently at Jesse. This time, Walter had been severely betrayed by this foolish partner. When Walter had asked Jack to kill Jesse before, Jack had even asked if Jesse was a snitch, but Walter had adamantly denied it. He never expected that Jesse would end up cooperating with Hank and becoming the most effective informant. Walter was furious, and a confrontation erupted on the spot.
Coward.
Get over here! Get over here! Get in the truck, will you?
Bring it up!
Put him in the car!
Come on! Get in the car! Hurry up! Get it!
Walter and Jesse were pushed into the car, and Hank immediately called Marie to inform her of the news. Hearing that Walter had been captured by Hank, Marie finally breathed a sigh of relief, but she didn't know this would be their last conversation, because at that moment, Walter suddenly saw several cars approaching. He knew it must be Jack's men. Walter shouted desperately, but Hank didn't hear him. As for why Jack and his men showed up even though Walter had called off the action, it could be because they sensed Walter was in danger and were worried that if something happened to him, there would be no one left to teach them how to produce contraband. Thus, a standoff between the police and criminals ensued, ready to erupt into a firefight. Walter screamed in an attempt to stop the impending clash, but handcuffed, he was powerless. Jesse, sitting in Walter's car, was also terrified. After a brief standoff, the inevitable firefight finally broke out. This is the most ironic blow in the classic American TV series Breaking Bad, and also the moment where each main character faces their greatest collapse. At the same time, it marks the beginning of the show's grand finale. The impact of this episode on the audience is even more intense than the final episode. Picking up from the thrilling plot of the previous episode, Hank was wounded when he ran out of bullets due to the huge difference in firepower between the police and the robbers, and his right-hand man Steven died outright. Seeing Steven's shotgun dropped not far away, Hank tries to make one last struggle before his death, but the ruthless Jack doesn't give him the chance. Jack's accomplice confirms that Hank and Steven are indeed from the DEA, and Jack decisively decides to execute Hank. At this critical moment, Walter stops Jack in time, saying that Hank is his family and begs Jack to spare Hank. But in this situation, Jack couldn't possibly leave any witnesses. Just as Jack is about to shoot Hank, a desperate Walter reveals that he has $80 million hidden nearby. Walter offers all the money if Jack agrees to spare Hank's life.
Is let him go. That's a hell of an offer. What do you think, Fed?
His name is Hank.
Should I let you go?
You can go yourself.
Please.
What? You want me to beg? You're the smartest guy I ever met. And you're too stupid to see. He made up his mind 10 minutes ago.
Seeing the situation clearly, Hank doesn't beg for mercy. He chooses to say goodbye to Walter and the audience in a tough guy manner.
What you gonna do?
Walter, watching Hank being killed, can't believe his eyes and collapses to the ground in despair. Although Walter exposed his $80 million, he couldn't save Hank, but it also proves Hank's place in Walter's heart. Jack's men dug up all of Walter's money and buried Hank and Steven's bodies in the same pit. Out of respect for Walter, Todd opens his handcuffs and requests his uncle leave 1 barrel of money for Walter. Jack lets Walter take the money and tells him not to hold a grudge. At this moment, Walter, suppressing his inner rage and sadness, agrees to Jack's demands. As Jack and his men are about to leave, Walter reminds Jack of his promise to kill Jesse, as Walter had already noticed Jesse hiding under his car. So Jesse was dragged out from under the car by them. Just as Jack is about to shoot Jesse, Todd suddenly stops him. Todd's reason is the concern that Jesse, during his collaboration with Hank, might have information that could be harmful to them. So Todd requests to take Jesse back for interrogation before killing him. Walter, powerless to object, agrees. As Jesse is about to be taken away, Walter vengefully reveals a deeply buried secret to him.
And I watched her die. I watched her and choked to death. I could have saved her, but I didn't.
Hearing this, Jesse collapses emotionally and stops struggling, allowing Jack and his men to take him away. From Walter's point of view, if Jesse hadn't wanted to take revenge on Walter, Hank wouldn't have been involved and died, and his $80 million wouldn't have been taken away from him. Looking back at the entire series, Walter and Jesse have been through countless breakups and reconciliations, supporting each other, loving and hating each other. In the end, neither could kill the other, and neither could escape unscathed. Their fates were equally tragic. Jesse helps Walter with his contraband and ends up alone with everyone around him dying. Jesse's attempt to get revenge on Walter backfired, and he ended up becoming someone else's slave. Walter once risked his life to save Jesse, but Jesse still stood against him. Determined to get rid of Jesse, Walter accidentally caused the death of his own family. These scenes of ironic drama and fateful encounters are enough to push anyone to the brink of collapse. The episode begins with Walter and Jesse making contraband for the first time in the wilderness, with Walter lying to Skylar that he had to work late at the car wash. This shot of Skylar has significant meaning later on, which we will discuss shortly. The screen shifts to Walter, who gradually disappears from the frame after successfully lying. Jesse and the RV also disappear behind him. The scene changes, with the sound of gunshots. The same place, the same angle. The scene of the police battle appeared here. It's the same plot that was just mentioned above. After Jack and his gang of robbers leave, the same location and camera angle only reveal a mentally shattered Walter. Walter then goes to his car and sees himself in the rearview mirror. Ironically, he can't help but adjust the angle of the mirror because he doesn't even want to see himself now. To make matters worse, when Walter starts to drive away from this place of heartbreak, his car stops not far from the site. Walter discovers that the gas tank is empty, and upon checking, he finds that the gas tank was unfortunately hit by a bullet during the shootout. Left with no choice, Walter begins rolling a barrel filled with $11 million home by hand. The director has also arranged a big egg in the shot of Walter pushing the barrel. Pay attention to the familiar pair of pants at the bottom of the frame. This is the same pair from the first shot of the first episode of the series. The pants that fell from the sky and were run over by the RV were blown off Walter when he was running away frantically in terror. The reappearance of the pants here seems to mock Walter's complete alienation from his family and friends, leading to his tragic end. After rolling the barrel for most of the day in the wilderness, Walter finally finds a farmhouse.
Hello.
That truck belong to you?
It does?
I'd like to buy it.
It's not for sale.
However, most problems in this world can still be solved with money. Meanwhile, Marie, having learned the news, arrives at her sister's car wash. She tells Skylar about Walter being arrested by Hank and says that Hank and she will help Skylar get through this ordeal. The condition is that Skylar must hand over all the DVDs Walter recorded to discredit Hank, which is Marie's true purpose for coming. Hearing this, Skylar can only reluctantly agree. But what Skylar never expected was that Marie would force her to tell Walter Jr. about it right now. Reflecting on the previous plot, when Skylar chose to launder money for Walter, keeping the children out of it was her bottom line. But now, Skylar has no choice in the matter. When Walter Jr. learned that his father was a criminal, He couldn't accept the harsh reality.
You're completely out of your mind. If this is true, then how could you keep this a secret? I mean, why? Why would you go along?
As viewers, we feel that Marie, standing on the moral high ground, is forcing her sister to let Walter Jr. know the truth, which inevitably feels like Marie's triumphant venting. Even though Walter Jr. would eventually find out, perhaps hearing it from Walter later might have lessened the blow. However, these plot arrangements are crucial setups for the following storyline. Meanwhile, a frantic Walter returns home, hastily packing his family's clothes, preparing to take them away immediately. When Skylar returns with an emotional Walter Jr. and sees Walter packing, Walter Jr. has a bellyful of questions that need answers from Walter, but at this moment, Walter has no time to explain.
Why are you here?
Skylar, please, will you just go get your things for you and the kids right now? This is our priority.
Hank had you in custody. He wouldn't just let you go. Where is he? Where's Hank?
I negotiated.
Negotiated?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Everything is going to be fine, but we need to leave right now. All right? Can we do that?
What happened? Where is Hank? Where is Hank?
All we have to do is go. We have to go right now. That's all we have to do.
You killed Hank.
What?
No.
You killed
No! Everything is going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. I promise you, but we need to leave right now.
After Walter received Jesse's call and left his family without saying goodbye, they were still on the same side. If Marie hadn't come to Skylar, Walter might have already taken his family and fled by now. But now, Skylar and Walter Jr. no longer trust him. Skylar slowly walks to the kitchen and picks up a knife from the table. This shot echoes the one at the beginning of the episode when Walter lies to his wife. The knife on the table at the start seemed to foreshadow the ending.
Get out!
Stop!
To someone who has killed their own family member, Walter's words seem meaningless and only make him look more frightening. The camera slowly pulls back, symbolizing the family's growing distance from Walter. A terrified Walter Jr. hurriedly calls the police. Facing the fear in his wife and son's eyes, Walter feels helpless. The reality of losing his family while trying to protect them deeply mocks Walter, driving him to angrily take his 1-year-old daughter away. A panicked Skylar runs after him, but it's too late. This also serves as an irony for Skylar's character. She tried everything to protect her children, only to lose them in the end, which is a devastating blow to her. In the behind-the-scenes footage of this scene, Anna was so immersed in the role that she couldn't calm down even after the cameras stopped rolling. Before the shoot, it had started to snow, and after filming, the director personally brought a coat to comfort Anna, Skylar's character. Anna, who also won Best Supporting Actress at the annual Emmy Awards for her outstanding performance this season. Meanwhile, Walter, who had taken his daughter, finds a nursery room to change her diaper. Judging by his clumsy movements, he probably hadn't changed his nappy more than a few times. When he picks up his daughter and asks her to call him daddy, she keeps calling for mommy instead. Walter was silent when he heard this. He realized that his daughter needed her mother's care more than his own. Meanwhile, the police have arrived at Skylar's house to investigate. Marie is puzzled as to how Walter could have taken the child after Hank had arrested him. At this moment, Walter calls. The police need to record the call and trace its location for clues. The following conversation appears as if Walter is blaming his wife, but in reality, he is trying to clear Skylar of being an accomplice. Walter knows the police will use the call recording as evidence.
This is your fault. This is what comes of your disrespect. I told you, Skylar. I warned you for a solid year. You cross me, there will be consequences. What part of that didn't you understand?
You took my child.
Because you need to learn.
You bring her back.
You were never grateful for anything I did for this family.
Oh no, Walt, you have to stop. You have to stop this. It's immoral, it's illegal.
And now you tell my son what I do after I've told you to keep your damn mouth shut. You stupid.
Skylar understands the true purpose of Walter's call and cooperatively apologizes to him.
I
I'm sorry.
Walter, holding back immense sadness, takes all the blame, including Hank's death.
You mark my words, Skylar. Toe the line, or you will wind up just like Hank.
Tell me what happened. Where is Hank? Please.
You're never gonna see Hank again. You think about that.
Walt, I just want Holly back. Just come home.
I've still got things left to do.
Choking back tears, Walter destroys the phone to prevent it from being traced, then looks at his daughter in the car with deep reluctance. Walter has already decided to return his daughter to her mother, as he is calling from in front of a fire station. To attract the firefighters' attention, Walter pulls the fire alarm, ensuring they will find his daughter sitting in the cab when they come to turn it off. Seeing her pitiful expression, the audience can't help but feel a wave of heartache. Alone, Walter takes his $11 million in cash and begins his life on the run. Breaking Bad is revered as a classic production because it vividly portrays the stark realities of human nature. It acts as a mirror reflecting the other side of ourselves. The protagonist, Walter, with his ironic life and tragic fate, perfectly embodies the show's title, Breaking Bad. It depicts the behavior and psychological state of those who stray down the wrong path, struggling between right and wrong. At the same time, it serves as a warning for each of us to see our own life paths clearly, not to lose ourselves on a narrow road like Walter, ultimately leading to the destruction of family and home, and forcing him to go on the run. When Walter is taken away, he happens to encounter Saul, who is also in hiding. Walter writes a note and hands it to Saul, asking him to find a few professional hitmen to exact his revenge. But as a professional lawyer, Saul still advises Walter to turn himself in, because even though Walter has distanced himself from Skylar in the phone call, if the police can't catch Walter for a long time, they will certainly trouble his wife. At that time, the house will be confiscated, the bank accounts will likely be frozen, and Skylar won't be able to find a job. Walter naively thinks he can transfer the money to his family, but Saul explains that the police are hoping Walter will try this, as it will make it easy for them to catch him if he tries to contact his family. However, Walter, blinded by hatred, swears to kill Jack's gang and take back the money he risked his life to earn. Walter insists he is doing all this for his family. Just then, Ed calls Saul to leave, telling the troubled Walter to wait. But Walter says the plan has changed and demands that Saul go with him because he needs Saul to help him strategize. Ed tells them to discuss it and make a decision. It's clear that Saul disagrees at this point. Remember the last time Saul went against Walter's wishes and what Walter said to him?
We're done when I say we're done.
Now Walter tries the same tactic, but before he can finish, he starts coughing like a sick cat, struggling to catch his breath. It seems his cancer is getting worse. Saul delivers his final line, marking his official exit from the series.
It's over.
As Saul predicted, Skylar is helpless when questioned by the police. She knows that if she doesn't give up Walter, both she and the children will be in trouble. Unfortunately, she has no idea where Walter is. If you look closely, you'll notice that Skylar looks much older overnight. With no leads, the police have no choice but to place Skylar's family under 24-hour surveillance. Ironically, when Skylar comes out at night to care for her daughter, she suddenly discovers several black-clad hitmen in the house. The person speaking with Skylar is Todd. Confirming that Skylar wouldn't alert anyone, Todd releases her. Remember when Walter decided to return to his family and Lydia came to see him at the car wash and Skylar kicked Lydia out? Now, with Walter being pursued by the DEA, the ever-cautious Lydia fears that Skylar might expose her, so she orders Todd to kill her. Out of respect for Walter, Todd doesn't kill Skylar but warns her not to mention anything about Lydia. At this point, Skylar was trembling with fear. For the sake of her daughter and her own safety, she agreed to all of Todd's conditions without hesitation. Seeing Skylar's sincere attitude, Todd leaves reassured. The next day, a well-groomed Todd meets with Lydia to report on his work. Lydia, as usual, communicates with Todd back-to-back like a spy. Upon learning that Todd did not kill Skylar but merely warned her, Lydia expresses her concern and says she will end their collaboration. Lydia doubted their ability to produce the high-quality contraband she wanted. However, Lydia is shocked when Todd mentions that there are 50 pounds of 92% pure contraband.
92%.
Truly?
And it's just like before.
92. Heisenberg level.
This explains why Todd stopped Jack from killing Jesse. They already have Walter's $70 million. There is no need to take such a big risk to produce more illicit products. All of this is because Todd likes Lydia. He does these things to create opportunities to interact with her. On the surface, Todd seems unremarkable, behaving almost like a beast with little humanity, but his love for Lydia adds depth to his character. Meanwhile, Walter is taken to New Hampshire by Ed, who provides him with a new identity.
Mr. Lambert, welcome to New Hampshire.
Previously, Walter was in New Mexico, located in the southwestern U.S. near the Mexican border. New Hampshire, however, is in the northeastern U.S. near the Canadian border. The area is a frozen wilderness, located on a remote mountain without phones or internet, with food supplies arriving only once a month at best. Each supply run costs $50,000. Ed warns Walter to stay put and make a list of anything he needs, which Ed will bring. If Walter doesn't follow the rules, Ed cannot ensure his safety, and the special service will be terminated. After giving all instructions, Ed departs, although Walter avoids imprisonment. Being isolated in this desolate place, cut off from the world, seems far worse than prison, compared to Walter's lucky escape. Jesse's situation is even more dreadful. Poor Jesse is imprisoned in a cellar by Todd and beaten beyond recognition. To prevent Jesse from escaping, Todd designs a custom anti-escape device for him. Even more cruelly, they post pictures of Andrea and Brock in the lab to threaten Jesse. At night, Jesse looked at the pictures of Andrea and Brock, and the idea of escaping came to him. After numerous attempts, Jesse finally removes his handcuffs. Just as he's about to make his move, he hears a noise outside. It turns out Todd is bringing him food, because Jesse helped him to create the opportunity to work with Lydia. As a reward, Todd sent Jesse ice cream to facilitate his escape. Jesse pleads with Todd not to cover the cellar with the tarp at night, saying he wants to see the stars. Todd, without much thought, agrees.
Good night, Jesse.
After Todd leaves, Jesse resumes his escape plan. He piles everything he can find underneath him, and with an intense survival instinct, Jesse grabs the overhead bars and manages to unlock the latch above. Just as he thinks he's about to escape, Todd and his men, alerted by the noise, rush towards him.
It's coming out, get it over with, because there's no way I'm going one by you psycho.
Desperate, Jesse wanted to die, but for these inhuman robbers, Jesse's threat is not effective at all. The scene shifts to Todd arriving at Andrea's house, claiming to be a friend of Jesse. Hearing this, Andrea lowers her guard. Todd tells Andrea that Jesse is in the car across the street, and when she goes out to check, Todd cruelly shoots her in the head. Witnessing this, Jesse cries out in agony, completely broken. Now, if he doesn't comply, Andrea's son will also die because of him. It's safe to say Jesse's situation is worse than Walter's. Meanwhile, after the longest month of his life, Walter finally receives supplies from Ed. After a month of isolation, Walter eagerly examines the newspapers Ed brought him. Ed also thoughtfully provides various reading glasses and updates Walter on Skylar and the children. Skylar has returned to her maiden name and found a part-time job, leaving her daughter with neighbors while she works. Their house has been auctioned off by the bank. Since Heisenberg's identity was exposed, their home has become a hotspot for tourists, forcing the bank to fence it off due to constant complaints from neighbors. Due to the recurrence of his cancer, Walter asks Ed to bring medication to manage it. Seeing Ed struggle to find a vein, Walter prepares to inject himself but hesitates and hands the needle back to Ed. Compared to his earlier determination, Walter's courage has dwindled. After settling Walter, Ed prepares to leave. Lonely, Walter pleads with Ed to stay longer, but Ed insists he has a long way to go. Desperate, Walter offers Ed $10,000 for 2 more hours, though Ed cuts the price in half.
10,000. 1 hour.
Walter's real intention is to test Ed's character.
What if I ask you to give it to my family? Would you do it? If I said yes, would you believe me?
At this point, Walter no longer has the strong desire for revenge that he had at the beginning of the episode, but starts to think about how to give the money to his family before he dies. He creates a wall of clippings about his family's recent life and public opinion to keep track of their situation. Walter's health deteriorates, and he loses so much weight that his wedding ring slips off. He picks up the symbol of his love, threads it onto a string, and hangs it around his neck, the only reminder of his wife. Walter then notices a cardboard box, and a bold idea strikes him. He emptied the box and put the money in it. Walter wanted to give all the money to his family before he died. Otherwise, he would die in peace. The scene shifts to Walter Jr. being called to the principal's office for a call from his Aunt Marie.
Aunt Marie, what's going on?
Hold on a sec, honey.
Son, it's me. Please don't let on. Carmen's nearby, right? How she cannot know. Son, are you there?
Yes.
The things that they're saying about me, I did wrong. I made some terrible mistakes. But the reasons intended, I never intended. I'm sending Louis a package. Now it's addressed to Louis, but it's for you, your mother, and your sister. There's money inside. About $100,000. Okay. I think.
You want to send money? Killed Uncle Hank? You killed him!
Wait, son.
No, please. What you did to Mom, you killed Uncle Hank.
Listen to me, you got to listen to me.
Just shut up. Just stop it. Stop it. I don't want anything from you. I don't give a You killed Uncle Hank. Why are you still alive? Why don't you just die already? Just die.
Hearing that his son refuses to accept his money, Walter realizes hiding is pointless and calls the police.
DEA, Albuquerque District Office. How may I direct your call?
I'd like to speak to the agent in charge of the Walter White investigation.
Who may I say is calling?
Walter White.
Hello?
Walter drinks while waiting for the police to arrive. At that moment, he saw a news interview with Gretchen and Elliot on television, where they mentioned their former co-founder, Walter, who is now the notorious Heisenberg. However, they both intentionally avoided the topic and denied Walter's contributions to the company in the early days. Seeing this, Walter seems to change his mind. When the police arrive, they find only an empty whiskey glass. This is one of the most satisfying and emotionally powerful episodes in the classic American TV series Breaking Bad. It is also the series finale of the last season. Unlike many other American TV shows that end poorly, the director bravely concluded the series at its peak in the 5th season, making it a rare classic in TV history. Following the exciting plot of the previous episode, after Walter saw his former partners, Gretchen and Elliot, on a TV program, he initially planned to turn himself in but then changed his mind. Walter then hides in a car to prepare for his final mission, but just as he is trying to start the vehicle, the police who were there to arrest him begin searching nearby. Walter silently prays, hoping to go home. If he can't find a way to leave money for his family, he will die with regrets. As if God had heard Walter's prayers, the police made a detour and even prepared the car keys for him. Walter immediately begins his journey home. The license plate had a detail. It read "Live free or die." Thinking carefully, isn't this also the theme of the series? Walter then pretends to be a reporter from a magazine to get the specific address and schedule of the Gretchen couple from the TV station staff. Walter places the birthday gift Jesse gave him on the phone booth, which means his time is running out. Next, he needs to execute his plan as efficiently as possible. The scene changes and the Gretchens drive back to their mansion in their limousine, laughing and joking without noticing Walter hiding in the shadows. Walter follows them and shuts the door behind him. If Walter hadn't given up the company to Elliot and Gretchen, with his abilities, buying such a house would have been a piece of cake. It must be said that the advantage of a big house is that when someone enters your home, you are completely unaware.
Spa action, right? And then we could do some sort of wine and then...
Given Walter's recent infamous Heisenberg identity, Gretchen and Elliot look at him as if he were a monster. They think Walter has come to harm them. Walter didn't beat around the bush and told them he had brought something for them and asked for their help to get it. Elliot, terrified, pulls out a knife and points it at Walter.
Elliot, if we're gonna go that way, you'll need a bigger knife.
At this moment, Elliot and Gretchen combined are not half as brave as Walter, so they obediently listen and pile all of Walter's remaining money on the couch. Walter instructs them to donate the money to Walter Jr. through an irrevocable trust on his 18th birthday. It must be said that Walter's idea is quite brilliant, and Elliot and Gretchen agree to his request. To ensure they keep their promise, Walter specially hires top snipers to monitor them.
Don't move, don't dare move a muscle. You don't want them to think that you're trying to get away. Just breathe. Instead, I gave it to the two best hitmen west of the Mississippi. Keeping tabs. And if, for any reason, that my children do not get this money, a kind of countdown will begin. You'll hear the scrape of a footstep behind you, but before you can even turn around. Cheer up, beautiful people.
What is completely unexpected is that the snipers Walter hired are Jesse's friends, Badger and Skinny Pete. The sniper rifles they use are just laser pointers, which looks comical but effectively serves the purpose.
You know, I don't exactly know how to feel about all this.
For real, yo?
How do you feel now?
Walter heard that the blue contraband had resurfaced, so he asked Badger and Skinny Pete about it. After receiving a positive answer, Walter realized that Jesse was still alive. Next, Walter began planning his revenge against Jack and his gang. The next day, he went to a restaurant. Coincidentally, on his 52nd birthday, he maintained his habit of arranging bacon to form his birthday number, just as he always did. Unfortunately, this time there were no family members to celebrate with him, and the lively parties of the past were absent. However, Walter wasn't there to eat. He had a meeting with a mysterious man. They went to the restroom to make a deal. When Walter got to the parking lot, he used the car's remote key to find his newly purchased vehicle. The important part was the M60 machine gun and several batteries lying in the trunk. Walter then drove to his now-seized home and saw Heisenberg graffitied on the living room wall. The name that once made him proud now seemed so ironic. The pool had become a place for others to skateboard, but none of that mattered anymore. Walter's main purpose was to retrieve the ricin he had previously hidden in an electrical outlet. Returning to the living room, Walter remembered his 50th birthday party from 2 years ago. In just 2 short years, everything had changed so drastically. As he left, Walter happened to run into his neighbor. The neighbor looked at Walter as if seeing a monster, but Walter calmly greeted her as he always did. Not long after, Lydia arrived at a restaurant to meet Todd for their regular transaction. She ordered a chamomile tea as usual, then picked up the only packet of sugar on the table, which Walter had prepared for her. Lydia didn't notice that Walter was sitting at the next table. Todd was soon to appear. Just as Todd and Lydia were about to have an in-depth conversation, Walter suddenly appeared in front of them. Since Walter was a wanted man, the cautious Lydia immediately stood up to leave, but Walter assured them that no one knew he was there and asked them to give him the duration of a song to talk. Walter pointed out that they were running low on methylamine and said he could optimize the production process to manufacture the contraband without using methylamine, thereby increasing profits. Walter claimed that he had spent all his money trying to avoid the police and was just trying to make some extra money in the hopes of making a deal with Lydia and the others. Lydia said she could discuss it with Jack. Walter readily agreed and told Todd he would meet Jack that night for negotiations. After Walter left, the naive Todd genuinely believed that Lydia wanted to collaborate with Walter.
We're not doing business with him. Todd, please, don't make me walk you through this.
In reality, Lydia's plan was to have Jack kill Walter to eliminate any future threats. She deceived Todd, saying it was to help Walter escape his suffering. Lydia then poured the entire packet of ricin-laced sugar into her cup. After leaving the restaurant, Walter headed to the desolate outskirts to do what he did best. He modified the items he bought into a remote-controlled automatic firing device and mounted an M60 machine gun loaded with live ammunition. This would become his final trump card. Seeing his wedding ring, Walter realized it was time for a real goodbye to his family. The scene shifts to Skylar. who had moved to a new home, receiving a call from Marie. Marie had learned that Walter was back in town and warned Skylar to be on guard against him. However, after Skylar hung up the phone, Walter emerged from behind a pillar. He said that their last phone goodbye didn't count. This time, he was truly here to say farewell. Skylar thought Walter was planning to turn himself in, but Walter said the police would come to arrest him. This hinted at the final shot of the series, but Skylar wasn't worried about Walter getting caught. She was concerned about anyone else coming to threaten her and the kids. Skylar told Walter about Todd and his gang threatening her before. Walter assured her that after tonight, no one would bother them again. He then took out his wallet. Skylar refused to take his dirty money, so Walter lied, saying he had spent it all. This was to ensure that Skylar and the kids would accept Gretchen's donation later. Walter handed Skylar the lottery ticket with the GPS coordinates.
Call the DEA once I leave. Tell them I was here, that I forced my way in. Those numbers are GPS coordinates. That's where they'll find Hank and Steve Gomez. The men who stole it from us, the men who still have it. They murdered Hank and Steve and put them in that hole. I liked it. I was good at it. I was alive.
Walter's statement was undeniably a subversion of traditional values. Human nature is ultimately selfish, but many people neither recognize nor dare to admit it because they fear truly confronting and examining their inner selves and souls. Finally, Walter asked to see his daughter one last time. Watching his sleeping daughter, Walter shed tears. This kind of sorrow might only be fully understood by parents. When Walter Jr. came home from school, Walter could only watch his son from the shadows, silently saying goodbye. Seeing this scene once again stirred the audience's sympathy for Walter. Night quickly fell, and Walter arrived at Jack's club as planned. He deliberately parked the car sideways in front of the house. After a thorough body search, it was found that Walter had nothing on him but his wallet and keys. Regrettably, the others didn't return his wallet and keys but placed them on a nearby pool table. Before Walter could start the actual business discussion, Jack and his gang were about to kill him. In desperation, Walter claimed that Jack owed him a life, accusing Jack of not killing Jesse as instructed but instead making Jesse their partner. Hearing this, Jack became immediately displeased. He's gonna show Walter what kind of relationship he has with Jesse, so he instructed Todd to bring Jesse in.
I'm gonna show you just how wrong you are. Then I'm putting that bullet in your head myself.
Although Jack said this to Walter, by the end, you'll realize he was really speaking about himself. At this moment, Walter took the opportunity to secretly grab the keys from the table. When Jesse, shackled, was brought into the room, Walter lunged at him, pinning him to the ground. Jack and his men stood by watching, unaware that their end was near. As Walter pressed the button on the keys, the opening scene of the episode unfolded. Everyone was dead except Todd, who lay on the ground, curious. He looked out the window to see what had caused this extraordinary event. As a result, Todd was strangled to death with handcuffs by Jesse. Walter picked up a gun from the floor and approached the dying Jack. Before Jack could finish speaking, Walter shot him in the head. This was Walter's way of avenging his brother-in-law Hank, as Jack hadn't let Hank finish his words when he was killed. Walter then tossed the gun to Jesse. Walter realized that his selfishness had led the inherently good Jesse into a downward spiral. In the end, Walter left his fate in Jesse's hands, granting Jesse the freedom he deserved.
Say the words! Say you want this!
I want this.
Seeing that Walter had been shot in the abdomen, Jesse couldn't bring himself to kill him. At that moment, Todd's phone rang. It was Lydia, calling to ask if they had dealt with Walter.
Is he gone?
Yeah, it's done.
Who is this?
It's Walt. Kind of under the weather. Like you've got the flu. That would be the I gave you. I slipped it into that stevia crap that you're always putting in your tea.
The ricin, which had been a plot element throughout the series, finally came into play. Walter took out Jack's lair all by himself. In the end, he didn't say much to Jesse, just gave a slight nod. Newly freed, Jesse, like an untamed horse, drove away from this hell on earth. In his final moments, Walter entered the laboratory that had driven him to madness. It was the only place where he felt he existed and could find meaning in life. In the end, when Walter lies on the floor of the lab, we see a sense of relief in him. He no longer had to painstakingly weave lie after lie, or explain himself to anyone, nor struggle between morality and justice. The notions of right and wrong, good and evil, black and white as seen by others didn't matter anymore. Living as he wanted was what truly mattered. It's no exaggeration to say that your life may change drastically after you truly understand this drama, and the influence is subtle. This is why many people watch it over and over again. Each viewing brings different feelings and insights based on one's life experiences. Of course, there are also many people who have a drama drought for a long time after watching this drama. It's like falling in love. Once you truly love someone, it's hard to love anyone else in the same way. This is a movie that fans had to wait a full 7 years for its release, because in the finale of the last season of Breaking Bad, everyone had their ultimate ending, except for Jesse, who escaped from the cage and disappeared. This movie also provides a satisfying conclusion to Jesse's unfinished story. At the same time, it is a farewell letter from the director to the fans, signifying that there will be no more stories for Breaking Bad. The story begins with a conversation between Jesse and Mike by the river. The timeline takes place after they completed the methylamine heist. After the accidental killing of an innocent boy, Walter and Jesse had a moral disagreement, and Jesse and Mike plan to leave. Jesse asks Mike where he would go after getting his retirement money, and Mike answers the last frontier, Alaska. The whole film is also about this destination, telling how Jesse overcame all the difficulties after escaping to go to the Holy Land in his heart that Mike recommended to him. Remember the license plate on Walter's car during his revenge journey? It read "Live Free or Die." Not only was it the title of the first episode of the 5th season, but it also hinted at the fates of Walter and Jesse. The deserving Walter chose self-redemption, while seeking revenge. He also gave Jesse the freedom he longed for. The inherently good-hearted Jesse chose to reform and embarked on a new path in life. Having just escaped from captivity, Jesse sees police cars approaching from the opposite direction. He hurriedly pulls into someone's yard, turns off the engine, and lies low on the seat. Jesse also familiarly pulls out a pistol from the passenger compartment, a detail that will be shown later in the episode. After evading the police, Jesse first goes to his buddy Skinny's place. At this time, Skinny is playing video games with Badger. Skinny almost doesn't recognize the disheveled Jesse at first, but they quickly hide Jesse's car. Starving for days, Jesse wolfs down some food and then falls into a deep sleep. The next day, Skinny and Badger see the explosive news about the gang shooting on TV, and they also learn that a fugitive suspect is being pursued by the police. Clearly, the fugitive suspect refers to Jesse. Jesse, traumatized from prolonged captivity, is extremely paranoid. As he wakes up, he looks at the ceiling, thinking he is still in the dungeon. The terrified Jesse hastily gets up, trying to escape. Noticing the commotion, Skinny and Badger rush to check, almost getting shot by the frantic Jesse. Once Jesse calms down, Skinny finds him some fitting clothes and tells him to take a hot shower. Feeling unsafe, Jesse even brings a gun into the shower. As he showers, he recalls being hosed down by Todd and others with a high-pressure water gun. Jesse's body is covered with scars from the torture he endured, and each shot makes the audience visualize the abuse he suffered. After washing up and shaving his head and beard, Jesse finally starts to regain his spirit. He asks Skinny for a disposable phone and calls Old Joe from the junkyard to help him dispose of the car he drove. Although Old Joe had seen the news that Jesse was wanted, he did not report him. Instead, he offered Jesse his help for free. Everyone was impressed by Old Joe's righteousness. However, in the next moment, when Old Joe discovers that the car's tracking system has been activated, he runs away in fear.
Jack. The company just activated, just this minute. Talk about timing. Look, Johnny Law is on his way, as in here, as in now. So farewell, goodbye, regrets, etc., etc.
Seeing that the police are about to arrive, Jesse quickly grabs the keys and prepares to drive away. At the crucial moment, Skinny suddenly mentioned a brilliant idea. Skinny tells Badger to drive his own car to the Mexican border and then has Jesse take Badger's car to escape. Skinny stays home to wait for the police. He plans to tell them that Jesse did come by, but he didn't know Jesse was a fugitive. After the two of them caught up, Jesse offered to trade vehicles with him. Furthermore, the Chevrolet El Camino is Skinny's dream car. so he could even pass a lie detector test. This way, the police will chase Skinny's car and won't find Jesse. Skinny and Badger give all the cash they have to Jesse. Before Jesse leaves, Skinny gives him the hat he has worn for 5 years to help disguise his appearance and avoid being recognized by the police. If you don't believe me, you can watch the 4th episode of the 1st season. When Skinny first appeared in the scene, he wore this hat. Considering the filming timeline, this hat has been around for 12 years.
Yo, Skinny. Why are you doing all this? Dude, you're my hero.
It's worth noting that this Chevrolet El Camino once belonged to Todd. It appeared in Season 5, Episode 6. After being rescued by Walter, Jesse used this car to escape. El Camino means the road in Spanish, which ties perfectly to the movie's theme of Jesse's escape. Sure enough, not long after Jesse leaves, he sees dozens of police cars speeding by. Thanks to Badger's car and Skinny's hat, he successfully avoids capture. Next, there's a flashback that sets the stage for Jesse's subsequent actions. While Jesse was still imprisoned in the dungeon, Todd sneaked him out when Jack and the others were away. Todd warned Jesse not to try to escape, or his girlfriend's child would be in danger. It must be said that Todd has gained the most weight over these 7 years, but this does not affect his performance in the slightest. Todd takes Jesse back to his home, which is located on Holly Street. Coincidentally, Holly is also the name of Walter's daughter. While the neighbors are away, Todd asks Jesse to help him lift the pickup truck's canopy and mount it on top of the pickup truck bed. When Jesse and Todd get to the room, Jesse realizes what they've come for. Todd asks Jesse to help him dispose of a maid's body because Sonia accidentally found money hidden in a book when she was tidying up Todd's room. This is something Todd will not tolerate and decisively strangles Sonia with his belt. This also echoes Todd's final gruesome strangulation by Jesse. The scene shifts back to the present, needing a lot of money to support his escape. Jesse goes to Todd's house to look for the hidden cash. However, the money has already been moved by Todd to another location. Before helping dispose of Sonia's body, Todd had mentioned he was going to relocate the money to another spot in the house. He even boasted confidently that no one would ever find it. Sure enough, Jesse searches for a long time but cannot find the hidden cash. During his search, Jesse notices that the TV in Todd's neighbor's house is playing a news segment featuring an interview with his parents. He quickly turns on Todd's TV to watch. Jesse's parents both want him to turn himself in. This lays the groundwork for Jesse's upcoming actions. The timeline shifts back to the past. With Jesse's help, Todd successfully moves the body. On their way to the outskirts, the remorseless Todd casually sings songs and occasionally greets passing trucks, showing no guilt for his actions. To avoid detection, Todd stuffs Jesse and the body into the truck bed. In a desolate area, Todd manages to bury Sonia's body after much effort from Jesse. Just as they sit down for a smoke, Todd realizes he's out of cigarettes and tells Jesse to grab a pack from the glove compartment. Coincidentally, there is a gun in the glove compartment. This explains why Jesse instinctively took a gun from the glove compartment when he first escaped by car. Jesse takes the gun in hand decisively. In that moment, Jesse is deeply conflicted. He wants to kill Todd to avenge himself but fears he cannot take on Jack and the others. Ultimately, Jesse does not dare to pull the trigger. Jesse was easily persuaded to surrender by Todd with a pizza, which also reflects the long-term enslavement of Jesse has completely lost the courage to fight back. Back in the present, Jesse has turned Todd's house upside down but still hasn't found the stash. In frustration, Jesse bangs his head against the fridge and hears something fall inside. But when he opens the fridge, he finds nothing. Just as he's about to close the fridge door, Jesse notices something in the door's compartment. He pries it open and a wad of cash falls out. Before he can rejoice for even 3 seconds, Jesse sees a shadow outside the window. He quickly closes the fridge. Through the peephole, Jesse sees 2 policemen approaching. Panicking, he hides. At this moment, the nosy neighbor Lou appears. Seeing the mess inside the house, Lou suggests the policeman hire a cleaner. Jesse then had a chance to move to a different position. After sending away Lou, Neil and Casey start searching the place. Soon, Casey discovers Jesse's hiding spot.
I'm no cop killer. And I will be cool. Understand?
Jesse seizes Casey's gun and orders him to call Neil over. Cleverly, Casey uses a code, and Neil senses something is wrong, so he approaches slowly with his gun drawn.
Whoa, 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 whoa! Put your gun down! Relax, relax. Put your gun down! Show me your hands! Everybody relax.
There's something I need.
As soon as I get it, I am gone. You let me out of here. I swear I will not hurt this guy.
You know how many officers we got downstairs? Tell him, Casey. Tell him how many.
A good 6 last I counted.
6 my ass. I counted 8 of them down there. A patrol car on all 4 corners, more up the street. They hear shooting. What do you think they're gonna do?
Oh, they're coming up. They're coming up, guaranteed.
That's right. They're coming up. Then how far do you think you're gonna get?
There's only one choice here, buddy. And you know what it is. Come on. Nobody wants to hurt you.
Give up, Kingpin. It's your only chance.
Seeing no way out, Jesse surrenders just as he did with Todd, abandoning resistance. However, when Neil and Casey start tying him up, Jesse realizes he has been tricked. It turns out these two have learned of Todd's death and are impersonating police officers to find the money. Jesse claims he knows where the money is hidden and guarantees Neil and Casey won't find it without him. Hearing this, Neil and Casey stop tying him up. At this moment, the nosy neighbor Lou knocks on the door again, offering his help. To get the money without further trouble, the 3 of them decide to cooperate. Casey goes out to stall Lou while Jesse takes Neil to the hidden cache. What Jesse did next was a bit confusing for Neil. Neil, relying on his gun, tries to get Jesse to leave quickly, intending to keep all the money for himself. But a now clear-headed Jesse doesn't pay any attention to him. He has finally regained his confidence.
Then do it already. If you pull that trigger, you are gonna have to kill that loudmouth down the hall and every other witness in the place. And you will be as I am.
Realizing Jesse has seen through his bluff, Neil agrees to let Jesse take a third of the money. With the money in hand, Jesse and Neil walk out of the apartment. Jesse demands his gun back, but Neil ignores him. At this moment, Jesse notices the Candy Welding Company sign on their truck, realizing that they are the welders who helped Todd remodel the lab.
I was wondering when you were gonna remember me.
If Jesse had recognized Neil during their standoff, he would have taken all the money and fled by now, but it's too late to think about that. Jesse takes the money he has and goes to find the contact Saul once gave him. Jesse only knows that the guy sells vacuum cleaners and has forgotten the code phrase. Using the information on the map, Jesse arrives at the front of the best quality vacuum cleaner shop. Coincidentally, Jesse sees the red van and rushes to the side to check it out. Jesse realized that the red van was the same one that had picked him up at the intersection. Jesse sees hope, so he goes to the shop and locks the door, then starts trying to say various code words to Ed.
I'm looking for a Hoover Max. Pressure Max, max pressure, Hoover, maybe it's a Pro Max. Got like a filter.
Hoover products are right over there on the wall behind you.
Look, I don't remember the exact password.
Seeing the guy won't admit anything, Jesse takes out the money and confesses his deep regret for not going with him the first time. If Jesse had gone with Ed, his life would have taken a different path. Just like our own lives, certain experiences are necessary for growth. Seeing Jesse's determination, Ed admitted his identity but insisted that Jesse pay him for the last job as well. This means Jesse has to come up with $250,000 in one go. Reluctantly, Jesse pulls out all the money he has, even the cash Skinny and Badger gave him. Unfortunately, he is still short by $1,800, but Ed didn't want to give him a discount. He just loaded up Jesse's money and told him to leave. Jesse insists that if Ed doesn't agree, he will stay right there and not leave. Ed had no choice but to call the police.
Hi, yes. There's a young man in my store, and he refuses to leave.
Hey, stop.
Yeah, he might be armed.
Stop me.
Not overtly, but yes, I'm beginning to feel threatened.
Are you serious?
Sure. My name is Ed Galbraith. I own Best Quality Vacuum, 2714 4th Street, Northwest. That's correct.
As Jesse is about to leave, he realizes that Ed might be bluffing, since calling the police wouldn't benefit Ed either. But this time, Jesse miscalculates. He underestimates Ed's principles. Luckily, Ed doesn't betray Jesse. He gives the police false information. After the police leave, Jesse calls back. saying he will make up the $1,800. That evening, Jesse calls his parents. Earlier, while searching for money at Todd's house, Jesse had seen the news interview with his parents. He tells them he is ready to surrender and gives them a location they both know, asking them to come pick him up. Finally, Jesse says his goodbyes to his parents.
I don't know if it'll mean much to you, but you did your best.
And whatever happened with me, it's on me.
Hearing this, the Pinkmans immediately drop what they're doing and rush out. The police officers stationed near the Pinkmans' house also leave with them. Jesse then goes to his parents' house, finds the key hidden in the brickwork, and sneaks inside. He locates their safe but fails to open it a few times. Finally, he uses his brother's birthday and succeeds. Do you think Jesse is there to steal his parents' money? That means you don't know Jesse well enough. He's actually there to take the 2 guns inside. Jesse then tracks down the address for Candy Welding Company. He is ready to settle the score with Neil and Casey. Unfortunately, Neil and Casey, flush with cash, are seeking some special services. To avoid complications, Jesse patiently waits for the right moment. During this time, Jesse recalls when he was imprisoned. It was Neil from Candy Welding Company who remodeled the lab for Todd and the others, chaining him like a dog to a track. In order to test the strength of the weld, Neil and Casey even bet Jesse to test it himself, which is Jesse's humiliating history. Now, the opportunity for revenge has arrived. When the service was over, Jesse walked into the room single-handedly and said he only wanted $1,800. When Neil sees that Jesse is holding an antique gun from years ago, he and the others can't help but laugh at him. Casey firmly refuses to give the money, but he's immediately intimidated by Neil's demeanor before he can finish his sentence. Neil proposes a Western-style duel with Jesse, with the winner taking all the money. This is exactly what Jesse anticipated, and it's the reason he brought 2 guns. From the things Jesse did after he escaped, it's like we see Mike in him. He's no longer the same Jesse who was crying his eyes out with his IQ down. The outcome is clear. Neil is quickly taken down by the hidden gun in Jesse's pocket, and Casey, trying to retaliate, is shot in the head by Jesse. This scene is a homage to Walter's revenge against Jack. Jesse then takes the driver's licenses of the other 3 and tells them to keep their mouths shut. Afterwards, he takes all the money. As he leaves, he ignites their welding tanks. With a dazzling explosion, Jesse is reborn. Here, we also see a bit of Walter and Jesse, as this is a typical Walter move. The next flashback is one of the most touching moments for fans. The timeline is from Season 2, Episode 9, where Walter and Jesse are out in the desert, cooking up contraband. Due to Jesse's mistake, they almost get stranded in the wilderness. They are only saved when Walter constructs a battery. During this time, Walter and Jesse agree to find a hotel to rest up. This scene was not filmed in the previous episodes and was eventually shown in the film version. Jesse makes a date with his girlfriend Jane over the phone, then knocks on Walter's door across the hall. Fans are thrilled to see this familiar RV again, feeling like it's a holiday celebration. Due to the dehydration from being stranded in the desert, Jesse gobbles down fruit to regain his strength. Walter is still in bad shape due to his condition. Jesse even went as far as the waiter's water bottle to stay hydrated. Walter then asked Jesse how long it would take to sell off this batch of contraband. Jesse estimates at least 6 months. Hearing this, Walter is disappointed. Feeling he won't live that long, Jesse promises Walter that he will give Walter's share of all the money to Walter's family even if Walter is no longer there. Walter trusts Jesse completely. Walter then asks Jesse about his plans, suggesting he go to college. But Jesse replies that he has a high school diploma and doesn't need to go to college. Seeing he can't persuade Jesse, Walter doesn't press further. Next, Walter expressed his envy towards Jesse. He envied Jesse's luck, saying he didn't have to wait a lifetime to achieve something great. This was also Walter's way of expressing his regret about his own life, lamenting that he only got to truly spread his wings at the end of his life. The scene then shifts to Jesse being taken to his dream destination of Alaska by Ed. The place is a frozen, sparsely populated land. Ed also arranged a completely new identity for Jesse. Jesse asked Ed to mail a letter for him. From the signature on the letter, it is clear that it's for his girlfriend Andrea's child, Brock. It's likely that Jesse also left some money for Brock. Then Jesse drives off in the car Ed prepared for him, embarking on a brand new life. Sadly, Robert Forster, who played Ed, passed away from cancer on the day the film was released, making this his final work. The scene then flashes back to when Jesse was in love with Jane, and Jane's words serve as a summary of Jesse's life.
I've gone where the universe takes me my whole life.
It's better to make those decisions for yourself.
If Jesse had understood these words earlier, perhaps his life would have been easier. That way, he could have distanced himself from all the major villains sooner and started a new life. Fortunately, Jesse got a chance to start over, and he emerged from all the shadows of his past. In contrast to the timid and cowardly Jesse from before, the Jesse who endured so much hardship has gained maturity and steadiness. Watching this, do you recall your own younger self? Do you feel a sense of empathy when comparing it to who you are now? This is also the most important message of the film, giving Jesse from Breaking Bad a complete and fulfilling ending.